Welcome to episode 106 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast Second Blaze. I am Blaze, your host, and in this one, I have officially moved to my new place. Everything is chaos. You'll see it once I switch scenes. It's a mess right now. But I'm here, I'm set up, and we're here to talk about a very, very, very interesting round of footy. A few upsets this week, some that we were not expecting to happen. Obviously, there's big news out of Carlton with Michael Voss having resigned during the week. We will talk about that, and just where the season currently sits after week one of Sir Doug Nicholls Round. So, without further ado, how are you doing, Mr. Cyrek?
Not too bad, not too bad. Pretty chill weekend, I would say. Spent a bit watching football, doing various things. Um, Also took my granddad came over. Well, we went to his house on Sunday, and we watched the Essendon Freo game, which was really, really nice. Made that game a bit more watchable when you sort of, you know, when it feels like you're doing a good thing by watching it.
Mm-hmm.
So had lunch at his house, was very, very nice. But otherwise, yeah, it was pretty enjoyable-ish week of football. Obviously, there was a spell during the Port Gold Coast game, which didn't bring me joy. But as I said, yeah, most games had something to them. A lot of upsets. I did fairly well out of tipping. I think I changed my tip from Brisbane to Geelong before the first bounce, and then I stuck with Melbourne over Hawthorn. So I'm pretty happy with where I got this week.
I did
But
not
you were
up.
a bit rougher.
I did not update our tips on our graphics. I forgot to do that. But yeah, I only got six correct this week. I did not change from Brisbane to Geelong, but I did get Melbourne over Hawthorn, so I'm still very happy with that one.
Yeah.
Um,
Coast to Coasters were the only one in our group, the non-Blazers work group that
that
got that one right. So,
not
as always,
not that I've
listening to
checked.
the Coast to Coast podcast has benefits.
Not that I've checked since we started recording. Wait, does that mean you got seven tips correct, or did you tip Port?
Oh, I tip Port.
Okay, so you still got six.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Disappointing.
Oh man, I didn't really believe Port would win. I just felt like I respect what Port's doing enough to like put them in the they're not a basket taste, so I'll tip them category. Um, that being said, yeah, Gold Coast at Darwin, it's pretty tough gig,
It
pretty tough
is.
gig. But as I said, both our teams going through a tiny bit of an uphill battle as you went to see Richmond.
Yes,
Uh,
I didn't get. I was indeed at the footy on Sunday. I did see St Kilda
mm,
whoop us, which was to be fair, that was expected.
mm.
And our injury issues have indeed worsened. So we will talk about that. But yeah, I'm pretty sure when I looked at my work comp, I think on Saturday there was only one guy in the entire competition who had a perfect round, but I don't know
Mm.
if he tipped West Coast. So he
Well,
furgeously might have just ended up on
man, if you
eighth.
tip Carlton, you're probably not a threat that much. Man, unless you believe in the new coaches or just like really hate Michael Voss, but like it was a brave tip,
Oh yeah,
but paid off.
yes, indeed it did. All right, let's jump over instead now to just our first game. Starting with our big Thursday night clash, the 2025 Grand Final rematch between
Mm.
Brisbane and Geelong.
And just because I don't think we've mentioned it, also the opening of the round or part one of Sir Doug Nicholls Round. Um, just yeah, as I said, a lot going on this week, so I almost forgot that. But it was very good to see a lot of the performances and the I was going to say rituals, but the yeah the all the effort and people that get in to do that before and after the games. It's always really well done.
Yes.
But in terms of the game itself, it was very interesting one. It started with a slight domination as the Cats were looking to get early grand final revenge. It was a very high pressure, intercept heavy game, and Geelong had an early clearance dominance, and it was looking really damning. However, Brisbane, they start getting easy movement the other way, led to a few opportunities to the lines, and expanded to the second quarter being very level. And we had a really interesting game. A few interesting matchups. Harris Andrews had Jack Henry put on him in a very Big Billy Frampton-esque role.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if you don't know your difference, Jack Henry is normally the defender, unlike Ollie Henry. And Oshie Mullen did a solid enough run with role against Lockie Neal. And yeah, as I said, the other one who was really having an impact early was Tom Stewart, who was intercept reader of the night, finished with a whopping 17 intercepts. I'm pretty sure that was the round high. Obviously, when I was writing that, the round hadn't finished. But yes, he finished over 17. The next highest was 12, which was Disco Turner.
Ah, yes.
So very, very big match. And 7 intercept marks as well. So, as I said, absolutely big game. And it was, it was almost the opposite of the grand final performance, where I think both teams were just getting their offense going. But both sort of struggling a tiny bit in, I guess, pure defense. Not so much generating intercepts. I think both teams did well early on. But yeah, as I said, both just had slightly too easy looks at goals in the first half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very weird. So when this match was on, I was sleeping. I was indeed sleeping for work. But from like when I checked the game at the end, when I woke up, and then obviously when I checked the highlights the following day, like the way that the story kind of unfolded in my eyes is that it was very similar, at least in the first half, where they were still like fairly equally matched, but then Geelong just started to chip away and started to get that extra space, and kind of just do what they've been doing for the entirety of this season, is whereas they've become a little bit more of a grind team. Which it isn't normally Geelong's style, but I think it's something that's been really, really like working for them this year. And like, with the scoreline being 11-10, 76 to 17-15, 117, like a 41-point margin at the end of the day is pretty dramatic, especially considering it was at the Gabba.
Yeah, and the real thing is, it was only one period of play, and you say they're a sort of grind team, and that is sort of true, but then they have these moments, and one of the big match winners for them, Sean Manor, you've probably already heard, he was very well noted in the commentary. He was already doing well on the outside carry before that, but he had a mammoth 3-goal in 4-minute burst, finished with 30 possessions, 14 score involvements, 5 goals, 672 metres gained. And yeah, it was pretty much all over. Brisbane started to get their stoppage game going a bit late. Obviously, it sort of dropped off during that period where Sean Manor got off the leash. It was a pretty poor performance, I think, by the third quarter inside midfield for Brisbane. But as I said, it wasn't like it was a utterly pathetic performance. But it was nevertheless a bit too easy for the Cats. And they just got the lead, staved them off, and just came with a very big win. And it's sort of the point I want to make. It's just like, and it's sort of why I wanted to change my tips when I saw some of the outs and the changes. Is just, I do feel like Brisbane still have been coasting at times. Like and I think the biggest thing for me was Zorko being out, and I'm a firm believer that, I don't think Zorko makes the whole team or anything, but I just think they were missing some really solid rebound as well off the half-back line, and not just because, as I said, it's just a pure distribution, is because Geelong are a really good team at providing front-half pressure, and it really just, made a lot of ineffective or, short chains. Darcy Wilmot, he had 30 disposals in this game. Fine enough performance, not great, but not really good. But I want to point out, he had a quiet 13-game possession last week, but they both, this game and last game, had the same amount of score involvements with just 2. And, Darcy Wilmot was probably the person that was designated to start a lot of those chains from the back half. So I'm not going to tell him off or any. Yeah, well, I'm not telling any players off, but you know what I mean. I don't want to pinpoint and say it's his fault. I'm just saying the players that were sort of in charge to start movement just weren't leading onto it, and it was due to good pressure. it was meaning that Darcy Wilmot, instead of taking some longer kicks, had to
Mhm.
go sideways, maybe give it to a lesser ball user, when then Geelong sort of forced a turnover. So it was a really, really good play. Obviously Geelong sort of did their homework, found a little weakness there. The other thing is, too, the pressure. Bailey Smith had an absolutely fantastic game, but one of the biggest indications is he had double the leading amount of tackles he had double the amount of tackles that Brisbane's leading tackler did, which was I think Bailey had like 10 and the other one had like 5 or something. There wasn't that much pressure
Oh yeah.
by Brisbane. Bailey Smith at 11, sorry.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So I think 5. So, as I said, it just sort of broke and, it just made Brisbane's midfield look average. Ashcroft, McCluggage really had little meaningful impact, where, as I said, Atkins and Brun, while they weren't like the game changers in this game, are really muscled into their game. And, as I said, it helped them find a footing for that period of dominance. So, as I said, this was a bit of a football lesson, I think. And I said last week, a lot of these games tend to have one of these teams just break a bit ahead by doing something tactically. And normally it swung each way each time. Obviously, Brisbane won in that grand final of a period. Before that, Geelong, then Brisbane, etc., etc. So, it's a very interesting matchup where I think sometimes it's one in the coach's box. And I think Chris Scott definitely had the wood over Brisbane. I don't think there's alarm bells going off. But I do think that there's a few, I would say, a few reminders needed for the core players, I would say,
Yeah.
in this game, where it's like, if as I said, we're good, we trust our structure, we've been able to do well when things aren't going our way, or, even when we're not going at full strength. But if you're not, putting in a decent enough effort, you're going to get found out, and you're going to get found out hard. Because, as I said, this was just, it wasn't unacceptable, but it definitely was pretty disappointing at home. But, as I said, Cats are a very good team at the, at the end of the day. And, they got the win here.
Yeah, and like we saw this last year as well, that like early in the season is when Brisbane had a lot of their faults. It's when they lost a lot of their bigger games, and it seems like it's happening again this year in the fact that like you have those heavy losses earlier on, even though you're still looking fairly good. And it just kind of reminds you of there are always steps to learn from, and steps you need to take to become that's to still be the best team in the competition. Because currently Brisbane are not that. Are they top 4?
No.
Yes.
Probably,
But are they the best team in the competition? No, because that is most likely Sydney right now. Geelong probably second.
Yeah.
Then I say and the rest of it, you could give it to kind of anyone between Brisbane, Freo, Hawthorn, maybe. You could even maybe throw Melbourne into that mix.
Well, that'll be interesting. We'll talk a little about that when we get the matchup. But yeah, I do think that Brisbane, like, you wouldn't be too concerned, but I think it's more just the DNA of the side. And, it's very hard because when you trust your system and, you've got belief in your players can execute even when things are going badly. Sometimes it also makes you blind to when you've just dropped off as a team in certain areas. And, as I said, it's all about preventing this from becoming periods. And, as I said, as long as they turn up next week, do their job, that'll be fine. But I definitely do think Fagan will be, getting in the ears of some players because, as I said, I think there was just, when things aren't going your way, as I said, like, your Ashcrofts who, I don't know, maybe Will Ashcroft was a bit harsh. He wasn't as big, but, your Dunkley was a bit down. Your Hugh McCluggage especially. Like, Hugh McCluggage, normally you see him provide some other role. He was trying to get in the clearance, didn't really do much damage. 164 metres gained, but only 2 tackles, which is normally some will think where he lifts when it's not providing those possessions. So, you know what I mean? Like, this was a game where I think maybe you're a bit frustrated, maybe you're whatever. Like, yes, it is like, Fagan's like, okay, remember, you've got other skill sets, you can provide roles when, the matchup isn't going your way, but, you have to focus on the on the fundamentals, because as a team we just need enough to be able to getting our system going, which is, you know, a very good front half game. You know, we still had Charlie Cameron being very live wire. Logan Morris did fairly well. Only had a few moments, but then again, like, Brisbane didn't have that much territory to work with. So, you know, you sort of shrug your shoulders there. And yeah, as I said, it was a brilliant performance. Again, I don't want to say, like, Sean Manners' game was probably one of the best you'll see all year. In terms of, like, pure Geelong performance.
He's easily he's such an elite talent. Like, the fact that he's only technically been in the league for only a couple of years, despite being mature age, is, like, still insane. Like, the fact that he got into the system so late. But, like, yeah, Geelong are sitting in a really good position at the moment. Again, yeah, Brisbane, stepping stones, always something to learn somewhere. And as the reigning premiers, as the reigning two-time premiers, like, they will very much be very quick to pick up on these lessons and adapt them into their system for following games, especially up against like the other bigger clubs as well, the ones that do actually provide those threats. On the injury side of things, Tom Stewart did come off with a corked calf towards the end of the match. He should be okay to play this week. If not, it'll be a rest for him. And then Dane Zorko was manager and a late change, as you had mentioned. He should be alright to play in this week's game. Alright, that does bring us now to our first Friday night clash. Another big clash to start off Sir Doug Nicholls Round. And it's Sydney and Collingwood at the SCG. And with a 6-point margin. This one's did win out 11-15-81 to 10-15-75.
And geez, this was a game that just went in so many different directions. It was Scott Pendlebury and Sydney that appeared to be arrested early, because Collingwood absolutely dominated early territory and had a 6-9 to 1-6 advantage halfway through the second quarter. I watched the very start of this game, obviously, because I was waiting for the Yaartapulti Gold Coast game, or should I say Gold Coast Yaartapulti, to start. And I was like, oh, geez, you know, it doesn't really look like Collingwood's going to do much wrong here. It might be a bit of an upset. And Sydney just looked shut down. The back half was absolutely, you know, locked away. Their ball movement was pretty much Blakey or bust. No one else on the half-back line seemed to do much. And this led to a lot of turnover goals. Collingwood were very fortunate to be able to receive. But, however, when Sydney were able to get forward territory, Collingwood's game just slowly collapsed, because there was one thing that hadn't really been a factor at this game that did, and that was the sheer stoppage dominance for the Swans. And as the title of this Gold Coast, Coast to Coast episode tells, there was an Un-Rucking-Believable performance by one Brodie Grundy. Massive 19 first possessions, 12 clearance to goes with his 17 hitouts to advantage. I think he also kicked a couple of goals, didn't he?
I don't know.
1-1.
There you go, 1-1.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, he had
1-1.
He had 30 plus touches as a ruck, plus 12 clearances. Like, that's insane.
Yeah, exactly. It was, honestly, it was a bit sad too, because Oscar Steen did all right early, but got injured pretty much halfway through the second quarter, had to go off the ground, and then it was just Daniel McStay and Jack Buller, who, you know, as good as, I mean, as much as you don't want to take that away from Grundy's performance, because, you know, as I said, it was still really massive. Yeah, as I said, Oscar Steen, to put it in perspective, Oscar Steen still was the leading hit-out person for Collingwood with his 5. So, you know, as I said, like, after that, there was just no chance. So, yeah, absolutely big performance. What else? Oh, yeah. So Collingwood, despite this, was still putting out rampant pressure. They weren't, like, going to lose this game or lightly.
No, Collingwood didn't roll over at all.
No. Kept the Swans really scrappy. Sheer dominance of forward half stoppage work. Just ended up being too much for them to handle. Collingwood came out with a close but bitter loss against a good team that's maybe flirting with danger a little bit. Like, I do think that they're very, very good, and I'm not actually worried, but as I said, they've just been, you know, just tiny scenes that as I said, they've, I'd say, you know, maybe they've shown signs of being pinned in occasionally. With the back half movement, because before these two games, you would say, oh, easily the best back half team in the competition. But Collingwood found avenues, and also who's the other team the week before? North Melbourne
Ah, yes.
actually found avenues. Obviously, North Melbourne couldn't actually stop them when they did get the ball through. Same with Collingwood, so it's sort of a mixed bag because, as I said, when you're still getting the ball through, when you're still scoring a healthy 11-5, I don't think it's that big a deal. But as I said, it is worth just lightly noting. It's the sort of thing where you make 1 or 2 points in the review on Monday, but overall you're pretty happy with the win.
Yeah, like you in this sort of situation when the game doesn't end up becoming that close, like you just take the full points. Like
Hmm.
like there's definitely still very much some avenues of improvement for Sydney, especially in
Yeah.
their forward half. Like 11-15 isn't that egregious, but again, it's like how difficult of an angle were set shots, or shots that were on the run. There are so many defining factors when it comes to that sort of scoreline.
Yeah.
But you also want to make sure that if you are taking set shots, that it's especially if it's your key forwards, they're actually being accurate because that is part like one of the big parts of what their roles are, right? So it's
Yeah.
kind of mostly that Sydney just need to work on because I think their back half is like really good at the moment. Granted, it is mostly Nick Blakey doing a lot of that transition work out of halfback, but I think in terms of just
Hmm.
like a stabilizing core, I think they're looking fine. Their midfield looking fantastic. Again,
Hmm.
Grundy, Heaney, dynamic duo. Like they are elite.
Yeah.
And you still got
McInerney helping in there.
McInerney has been a really big
Also,
help. You still
Chadwick's
got
sort of been a bit down, but he's still having moments.
yeah, he has had a little bit of a quiet season. Like not that like super quiet. Like he is still very much having an impact, but he's not like that kind of burst factor that he
He's the
was last
biggest
season.
like him and Charlie Kerno definitely could have left some points on the board
Oh yeah.
this season, unfortunately.
Obviously,
But as I said,
Papley, he's also been in some 50-50 form. Like, it's probably good to have him out
hmm,
there as a veteran presence. But in terms of
yeah,
just like what he's been offering, hasn't exactly been his peak. And
yeah,
then and they're still missing Errol Goulden, who will be like a
hmm,
huge difference maker when he's back because that's just how he is. But like
yeah,
in terms of what Sydney
yeah.
are currently like showing us, they're very much worthy of being considered the best team in the competition right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I just, wanted to point out, like, this wasn't really like the third quarter was fairly dominant, like 14 scoring shots, 6-6, do really well. But like everything else, like Hollywood's defense was really good, even without Darcy Moore, kept them to 6, 5, and 5 scoring shots for the first, second, and fourth quarter, which is really solid. And, as I said, they made it hard for, Collingwood, sorry, Sydney, like not too many of those shots, as you mentioned, were particularly
Mm.
easy. In fact, Sydney actually had some nice longer set shots that they converted to sort of make up for it. They kicked 4-6 for the night, but they weren't egregiously inaccurate. As I said, I think that was also just Collingwood putting on a bit of defensive pressure, which is as I said, where they are, and as I said. I think the most disappointing thing for them is like for the most part that they did have enough score for a while to be able to get this win, and that's always going to be the problem for Collingwood is that they need to find avenues to goal because they're not really have too many people firing. Charlie West gets a goal, but he's still a very young forward. Jack Buller has pretty much no impact, so you're pretty much relying therefore on what's his name McStay
Yeah.
in the forward line, and while he did some good things, he was forced to ruck in this occasion, and he just made it a bit more anemic. So again, it was probably unlucky too, Oscar Steen going down. All that stuff about Pendlebury should he have been playing or whatever. I don't actually think it makes that big a difference. I think if you're gonna like say if anything, like Oscar Steen going down might have been the difference between winning or losing, but like as I said, I think that's just like the whole other conversation on like how much attention's been going on Scott Pendlebury, whatever it is, 365 or whatever. It's not 365, is it?
No, it's 433.
It's 4 something. 433. Yeah. And honestly, I don't really care that much. It's like I find the media going on about it a bit annoying.
Yeah.
So I'm choosing to ignore the media. The only thing I think is ridiculous is the fact that they're allowing Pendlebury to get paid outside the cap for sales of his jumper, which is pretty bizarre.
Yeah, I get it if it was like, like other forms of memorabilia, like whether like him if it's pertaining to his likeness or like he's signing them and stuff like that. That I understand. But if it's just purely the Guernsey and the fact that it's a special gold Guernsey, quote unquote, that not even Boomer did for when he hit 432, purely for the fact that he probably could have played another 2 years and it wasn't meant to retire.
Yeah.
But it's like this feels so. This not at this point. It's not even related to this current game we're talking about. But it's like it just feels so out of proportion to what it really should be, and it's very Collingwood-like to make it feel very egotistical.
And I think it's almost a bit like it's a tiny bit disrespectful to not so much like the others, but like partially to how like this is going to be like it might be unreachable or whatever, but like again, people said that about Boomer, and it's also pretty. I think it's unfair to like focus so much on the breaking record when like someone like Travis Boak, who if you scale like with travel and all that, I think Travis Boak is technically the most, or Travis Boak and David Mundy probably. Mundy, obviously, because he has to travel a bit further than Boakey.
I guarantee you, if Mundy and Boak were both the Victorian clubs, they would have hit it. They would have very easily hit it.
Like, they, as much as Pendlebury, deserve the exact amount of plaudits.
Absolutely.
I think Boak had it fairly. I think Mundy really got a bit underdone by all that. But you know what I mean? So, as I said, but the fact that they're not Victorian just means that they'll never get it. So I just think that, the AFL as a whole league competition should have probably said no to that.
Well, here's the thing.
Maybe given the jersey, I don't really care.
But, the other members of the 400 club are primarily Victorian club players. Sean Burgoyne, granted he started at Port but went to Hawthorn. Kevin Bartlett, Dustin Fletcher, who was nursed to 400, just because he's a very tall player with a very injury-prone body. Michael Tuck, who primarily played for Hawthorn, and Boomer.
Yeah, exactly. So, and also Dustin Fletcher, also very beneficial for the sub rule. They burnt a few subs, putting him off early. So, yeah. But as I said, I don't want to make this like anti-Victorian or like anti thing. I just think that it's worth talking about how, as I said, I think the whole thing is you should respect Scott Pendlebury, how amazing an achievement this is in terms of like AFL football. But yeah, as I said, some of the pageantry has gone a bit over the top, in my opinion. But that's next week. Collingwood will play the West Coast Eagles at the MCG, and it will be very pretty. But they won't be doing it with another player who, unfortunately, as I said, sort of went out for this game.
Yeah, at the moment it is a suspected ACL for Oscar Steen. I don't know. I would think he's received scans at this point, but I don't know if it's been publicly released, if it's a confirmed ACL or not as a recording. So hopefully it's only like an MCL or just a basic knee injury and not an ACL, because that's not good for Collingwood, especially with the fact that Darcy Cameron's been in and out of the side at the moment with injury. So that does leave them in a very precarious position when it comes to their ruck stocks. Again, kind of a similar position to where the Dogs are currently sitting, whether it's like with them being like it's either Tim English or nothing. as we've seen from this week's game. We'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, I think Collingwood, in terms of like some of the stuff that's going on around the ground, I think they're actually not in a bad position at all. I think
No.
they've definitely improved over the past couple of weeks in certain areas. But yeah, if they lose Oscar Steen and they still have issues with Cameron in terms of his injuries, then it's going to be pretty tough for them to have stronger ball winning capabilities out of the middle.
Yeah. And it is a point I lightly want to make because I forgot about it because I got distracted by Scott Pendlebury. But yeah, like Collingwood have been very reliant on oppositions making mistakes. A lot of their scores come from turnover. They haven't been getting that much from stoppage, and it's not just stoppage to score, but it's stoppage leading to a meterage deficit where their
Yeah.
bowl is just not in their forward half enough. So again, they really need to look at ways of generating ball, that aren't the opponent making errors. One of the ways, obviously, stoppage, as a lot of teams tend to do. The other is, trying to break up their movement. Look for the longer target with some of their kicks. They're very reliant on moving the ball with hands. As I said, a lot of the long handball teams are also long kicking teams anyway. Collingwood are very much the opposite. Short kick, long handball. And it's just leading to, as I said all year, being a bit weak with their offense. They're not a very potent team on
No,
their own.
not really. No, they do very much rely on their opposition more so than they rely on their skills of being able to capitalize on turnovers rather than
And put pressure on, obviously.
yeah,
Like
rather than just their opponents making the mistakes themselves, essentially.
Yeah,
Because your opponent could make a mistake, but they could very much have a second effort and keep the ball in play for them rather than taking advantage of.
Yeah, it's all about assessing very quickly because you don't have much time in football.
No, it's all split second decisions most of the time.
Yeah, the most likely chains to lead to a score once you do have that turnover, where the weaknesses are, and that requires vision, good handballing, and obviously one or two really good piercing long kicks that are near enough to the contest at any given time.
Yes, yeah, it's all very much, um, split second decision making, and whether that split second decision is the right decision, and if it's not, how do you better read the play in the future to ensure that you're making a right decision down the line. There's all sorts of micro adaptations in this sort of game, and Collingwood are very much the type of team to focus a lot on those sort of micro decisions because of the fact that they play very well off turnovers.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's jump over now to our game up in Darwin, where the Gold Coast Suns hosted Yaartapulti. This is their second game in Darwin consecutively. Last week they played St Kilda up there, and with a 25-point margin, the Gold Coast Suns did win out 15-8-98 to 10-13-73.
Yeah, it was a bit interesting. Obviously, the lesser game of the two two games that went on, but it was still, it was definitely more interesting, I guess, than the scoreline presented. The first of the fact is that one of the more brutal periods in the middle of the game, and that the Suns kept their Darwin record clean, obviously. Gave Port their biggest loss against them. Obviously, they were playing against Yaartapulti in this game. But yeah, it was really the difference in goal kicking that was the only thing that was keeping this being a really close game. Because Yaartapulti, right out the bat, struggled to find connection in the forward line in very greasy conditions, and it was very much the opposite for Gold Coast Suns, who just kept on finding their targets, getting the goals when the game was sort of going their way. But it was still pretty even for the most part until 5 straight centre bounce clearances happened. They lost the inside 50 count 4-15 and only had 15 time in their forward half from about halfway through the second quarter to 10 minutes into the third quarter, and this gave the Suns a 40-point advantage. It was a brutalization in a very condensed period of the game. Otherwise, Yaartapulti actually fought back a bit near the end. I do believe that it was more just because, playing a couple of games at Darwin. Suns picked up a couple of injuries, that they were starting to tire out. But 9 scoring shots only translated to 3-5, prevented a miracle comeback as, unfortunately, Georgiades and Whitlock were starting to really hurt Yaartapulti with their wayward set shots. Obviously, I am a big Georgiades fan.
Mm-hmm.
I know what he's like with his accuracy. But this was a game where, because it was greasy conditions and you don't get as many looks, that inaccuracy just really hurt. Because a lot of the other forwards were putting in their efforts. Joe Berry had an absolutely fantastic game. I thought Joe Richards was really good. In fact, he kicked 3 goals. And also one of my new favourite players, Ewan Cherub McKinlay. If you haven't seen him, he has some of the reddest cheeks in the league. He sticks out like a sore thumb. In fact, that's sort of what his cheeks look like. But, there was still a decent amount to like in terms of the ground on that Port forward line. But it wasn't as clean as the Suns' entries, and it definitely wasn't a good day for the Tolls when you compare it to the couple of players that got off the hook for Gold Coast. Again, talking about Ruckman's, big Ned Moyle, 3 goals, 13 hitouts, and, wasn't actually meant to play solo ruck. Wasn't meant to play split ruck duties. Jared Witts was a laid in for Jamara Ugle-Hagan.
Mm-hmm.
But he was by far the most dominant impact. He was like, you know what? If I don't have to ruck, I'll just kick goals. And that he did. And it was really impressive. And yeah, as I said, it was just, very, while I think that Gold Coast did have some, minor flaws, it was a very mature performance by them. Again, John Noble absolutely dictating that back half line, 2 games in a row where the game was just sort of dictated by his play. One of the most important players in that side. And, a very good performance there.
Yeah, it was very weird to kind of see, like, obviously Jared Witts coming in and, like, only having minorly impact because we know he has been a little down on form.
He was pretty
this
tanked.
season.
It was probably like on the emergencies, like, oh, I'll play, but if I do need to, I need to be managed. That sort of deal, because he was looking a bit slow.
Yeah, there's a
and honestly,
bit
props
like
to
that.
him. Like, it wasn't effort. Like, he's still.
He's
trying to run around and all that.
He was still doing, doing his thing. But yeah, like we know he's been a bit down on form. He's probably quite sore. So having Ned Moyle step up is actually huge, especially in a week where it was probably dominated the most by rucks around the competition. It was very interesting to see that dynamic work out well. Obviously with Port, Jordan Sweet, he's had a little bit of an uptick in his performances over the past couple of weeks. This one, a little bit more on the downwards factor, but a lot of that probably could be contributed to the Darwin conditions. It's a pretty hard climate to get adjusted to in such a short term.
The last 2 weeks have probably been a bit lacking in the ruck department. Apart from that, it's been pretty good go since he got dropped the first week.
Oh, yeah.
Vicentini just looks way out of it, though. I am very surprised we would play him in Darwin, to be completely honest. He's not a very good set of hands. So he's not that great a forward line option in the greasy conditions.
Yeah.
And yeah, he just didn't really provide all that much. So I think that was a bit of an error there. Even though I do have a bit of faith in the young kid, it just wasn't the type of night where I'll be playing that second ruckman like that.
Yeah, I do agree with you in that regard. And then obviously, just with like some of the smaller players, they had their variety of impacts. But it was just very interesting to kind of see Port. Also, the margin does seem like pretty small. I think that it probably could have been. It was based on the midfield work of Port Adelaide. I think it generally was a fairly minimal game. It was fairly close of a game. It just was the wayward kicking and the uncharacteristic accuracy of Georgiades. That was kind of really let down the fact that your midfield was actually doing so much work this week.
Yeah, well, it's sort of the hard thing because, again, like, again, Port outscored Suns from stoppage 41-27. Won the general clearances by 11. But, you know, as I said, it's just so disappointing that in periods of games, they will completely break down. And I do think, like, this was a game where I think the midfield was definitely, like, Butters and Drew were just so much better than all the others. Wines, Jamara Eagle, J-U-H? That's meant to be Jason Hall-Francis. We don't have J-U-H. Sweet, Vicentini, and Watkins, who's still getting a game, and I haven't really noticed his impact much. You know, as I said, it was just so tepid. And yeah, thanks for that. But, you know, it's just, you know, on the outside, there's a bit of positive. You know, as I said, I talked about McKinley before. Richards was really solid. And the debutant of, and I had to break this down on my sheet, Anastasopoulos.
Correct. It's a very Greek last name.
Yeah, exactly. I did see like a TikTok from Port where they try to get players to spell his last name, and there was a 0% success rate for people that wasn't Tom Anastasopoulos.
Port Adelaide aren't exactly known for their English skills.
No, but Mitch Georgiadis is Italian heritage, so you would have thought that he might be able to pick in there, but nah, he had no chance. He was one of the worst performers, so sort of letting down that European you know, connection there. So it is what it is. But yeah, as I said, he was really good early. He sort of died off a bit in the second half. Again, first game being in Darwin, can't really blame him. So again, I've sort of written as well, like Port are becoming X-Course champions, where they're able to not be able to get wins despite doing really well on X-Scores, tend to outscore opponents, should at least have a couple more wins on the board theoretically. But, you know, as I said, there are just signs that, you know, a lot of these losses are maybe not deserved, but, you know, like, it's not that I think Port are like one of the most unlucky teams going around at the same time. Like, they're young, they're making mistakes, and, you know, they're lacking a bit of polish.
They're working with a slightly different game plan too now that they're firmly under Josh Carr.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem with fixturing too, is like, as much as you tend to like having easy games early, the easier games were when they were getting adjusted and they were making a bit more errors than normal. I think, as I said, and maybe this will be proved in the next couple of weeks where you have Carlton West Coast, you know, we'll see if that's able to change. But as I said, for this game, Yaartapulti, not too bad, but Gold Coast were just definitely a class above the rest, especially in the second half. Noah Anderson really, really got going. Mac Andrews, he played fantastic. You know, he was roaming around when he wasn't having to be as closely connected to the forwards because they weren't having much impact. He was just able to dictate play and link up with players like Brodie Grundy, who is yeah, I mean, I would put him in All-Australian honours at this point. I'm pretty convinced that, you know, in terms of halfbackers, he is both scoring impact, rebounding impact, and general defence. He ticks all three boxes. And, you know, as I said, for a team that tends to run their play through there, Brodie Grundy is a huge part of that success, even if John Noble is pretty much up there with him with skills and what he's able to provide. And lastly, Jed Walters kicked 3 goals, which is insane. Like, in greasy conditions, Jed Walters, skinny, lanky, tall kid, and Ned Moyle, skinny, tanky, cold kid, kicked 3 goals each. It's just, how? It's unfair. That's where Port's unlucky.
But for the Suns, that's just the Darwin magic.
Yeah. Well, maybe. I mean, they were the only multiple goal kickers for the Suns. Like, I thought Port were defensively okay. Otherwise, again, that period of stoppage was pretty harsh and it just blew them out. But again, it's pretty much the tale of Port's defence. They're pretty good unless the midfield just goes to sleep and then they just get a run of goals kicked against them.
Yeah, it is a bit like that. I was reading an article yesterday, something like that, about some of the best halfbacks in the league right now. I can't remember who was ranked first. but it pretty much like John Noble is basically considered the second best halfbacker in the league right now. Like the fact that he's doing
Yeah.
such incredible work, and honestly, I think you're right that Brodie Grundy should be up in that conversation as well because those two together
Mm.
have done some fantastic work for the Suns this season, coming off of halfback, and you've got Daniel Rioli there as well. You know, three-time Premiership player
Yeah.
Daniel Rioli. And he's just, he just does his own thing at the same time, and somehow that just whole system like just works really fluidly.
That's what I'm saying. It's because Brodie Grundy is defensively accountable still. Because again, they're Noble bit more of an attacker than defender, Rioli a bit more attacker than defender. But as I said, when you've got that defensive mix, you've got someone to go on that like small, medium-sized forward. That's also to still be able to go in chains, to still be able to generate spark off the halfback, and still be able. Sorry, yeah, I get those 2 points really. It just adds so much variety to the halfback. And he's a really good interceptor as well, where the Suns like to start a lot of their chains. So, yeah, as I said, that was pretty much the case in this night. The Suns got a fairly decent amount from turnovers, 10-5. Port, young team, going to make a few turnovers, especially in Darwin. I'm not too worried about that. Otherwise, the game was, it was okay to deal with as you want. It was just, it was not as good as other Port losses, but playing in Darwin, you just sort of take that, I guess.
Yeah.
No
Considering
problem with effort, in my opinion.
considering the
Except for a
conditions
few players.
for a team that is typically from a state when as you get into the colder months, it makes it a little bit like very difficult to adjust to a warmer climate that's warm even in winter. So I think the like a 25-point margin is perfectly fine to go out on when you're playing against basically a top 8 side in rough conditions.
And the fact is, they still bounce back after that horrid period. It's
Yeah,
just,
exactly right.
So that's going to be the learning period for Port Adelaide. It's just making sure they've got a way to recover. Because as I said, it's been multiple matches where that period has been almost in every game where they just get dominated from the clearances. And it's been a problem in other years as well. So, Carr has a bit to tinker with. But again, young team first year, that's just sort of what you work out on the go. They'll be able to get that. But Yaartapulti, have a game next week and, trying to bounce back after a pretty tough run, probably the toughest run of their fixture. So we'll see if they are a bit better than 3-7.
Yes.
As the Gold Coast just bounce back. It's nice having 2 wins in a row. Struggling for a bit. People were saying there's a few red flags and then you just go bang, bang. And life seems to be pretty good.
Yeah, I completely agree. On the injury side of things, Lockie Weller came up with a hamstring injury. Will Graham came out with concussion, so he will not be playing this week. And Lockie Jones also with concussion, so he will also not be playing this week. All right. Jumping over now to South Australia, where we head over to the Adelaide Oval, where Kuwarna are hosting North Melbourne. And with a big 68-point margin, the Crows did win out 20, 13, 133 to 9, 11, 65.
Yeah, and apart from a couple of goal early jump by North Melbourne, it was an absolute brutalisation by Kuwarna. And it was pretty brutal after the solid, they had a pretty solid performance last week. And it was only errant goal kicking keeping the contest close. But the real problem was the lack of pressure turned from a slight to major concern as North Melbourne allowed 22 set shots from 16 marks inside 50 from a wide range of goal scorers. They just were not getting any of their matchups right. Murray and McAndrews gave Cherry a bit of a lesson as North played their statistically best players all come from the midfield, yet get outscored 8-7 to 1-4 from stoppages. It's what I've been saying is you can go on about that core all the time. They just don't quite get points from them. Been a lot better this year, but this is probably an example of where they are most flawed. Granted, I will say Adelaide's backline really did put on the clamps, and it was really only junk time by Paul Curtis that made the scoreline flattering. O'Sullivan, I think, played to his age, being put on Rankin, who ironically probably dropped off after he got his tag. He just sort of really, really lifted early on, almost trying to prove to O'Sullivan that he wasn't ever going to have any chance of tagging him. Also, just a weird mixer, a matchup in my mind. O'Sullivan isn't really the sort of player I would play on Rankin, a player known for his burst speed, but there's not that many people that I think have the ability to tag Rankin, especially not in this form.
Yeah, probably, and even probably not even just in North in general. Like, they have players who can match his speed, but I don't think they're defensively accountable to play on a player like Rankin.
Well, they're not defensively accountable to, like, almost anyone in the league, let alone
also true.
Player that's having
North are very much an offensive-focused team right now. That's what they're primarily developing on. But their defensive side of things is what they got to go on to next.
And that's what, I was saying is, like, as much as you can say about it, you say, oh, they're offensively based in the midfield. Oh, it's really good. But again, 1-4 from stoppage. It's like, they might as well be West Coast.
Yeah. They have their highs. Currently, they have their highs and their lows. But honestly, like, both teams are very comparable.
Oh, this is the lowest.
No, this is the lowest that they've been probably this season so far. Granted, you're up against
huge,
but for the most part, informed Crows. Like, they're looking. To be fair, their last couple of weeks have been very hit and miss. There's been a multitude of reasons as to why. But like the fact of the matter is that, like, the Crows are only really missing Keane as like a very key player in their system. And now that they've got Rankin back.
Not today.
No, I mean just like in terms of just like the past couple of weeks, whole season. They're just like in terms of their system.
I'm saying it's like I've actually been impressed by the fact that they're able to patch up things in their forward line without most of their key players. Obviously, they were missing Thilthorpe. The other one, not Fogarty.
Tex?
What's his name? Texan. Thank you.
Oh yeah, they were missing both of their tall forwards this week as well, weren't they?
Yeah, so they were lucky. Fogarty had a really good job, as I said. Tobin Murray and Lachlan McAndrews just pinching in with a couple of goals, and it sort of like led to a bit more creativity. Josh Rosselli being able to pinch in for 3 goals, but again, maybe they're not relying so much on those key forwards. Is like they've really asked themselves to be able to find different avenues to goal, and I think they really excelled at that this week. And as I said, it was just, there was just, again, when last week, I sort of had a go at North Melbourne a bit. It was like, yeah, you were able to defend like most of them, but when you did break, there was just so much space between you and your defenders. The problem with this game is they didn't have any movement stoppage, and they still had that lack of space when they were defending. So it was sort of the worst of both worlds. Whereas one of them was really good, shut Sydney down. And, to be fair, Adelaide is a team where you could try and do that, especially because they've been struggling moving the ball from the halfback line. But, as I said, it was just not it. As I said, junk time, got them a bit of joy, I guess. But this was probably as bad as a performance that North Melbourne have had all year. And one that gives Kuwarna a bit of momentum again.
It does. It gives the Crows a bit of breathing room as well in terms of like development.
They've lost a bit.
Development time. Yeah. They have lost a little bit of percentage over the past couple of weeks with some of the losses that they've sustained. But yeah, this does bounce them back a bit more in terms of being considered contenders again. I don't know if they probably will. They'll definitely make top 10 and have a shot into the wild card. You would assume. Not purely just based on form, but just based on how we've seen them in the past couple of years, how they have been like highly rated contenders. So it'll be interesting to see once we get past the mid-season where the Crows kind of end up. But right now, like, they're in a very interesting position, I think, and that considering, they've still got Thilthorpe and Tex to kind of come back in to round out that forward line. We don't know when they're going to get Keane back. There's a possibility he may not come back at all this season. So it's been very interesting to see how they've had to kind of shift up their defensive line to kind of cover how important he was last season. And, in a game like this, where once North gets that ball into their inside 50, I really had to tighten up a little bit in terms of how the Crow, like the Crows specifically, how they handle things defensively. And they did really well, considering North can be really threatening inside 50.
Yeah, like that's one of their biggest boons is their conversion once they go inside 50. And it wasn't even bad. Like it was 45.5% today, which is, whatever. But yeah, as I said, on the opposite, 67.3% was Adelaide's score per inside 50, which is pretty not great. Generally you want to be going around 50%. Adding 17% on top of that, to already a pretty decent. Actually, it was only 5 in the end. The inside 50 was 49 to Adelaide, 44 to North Melbourne.
Oh, yeah.
So
it's a fairly even in terms of.
Yeah, it was more just the
shifting sides
around the ground.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine
that was like the biggest one where North was just like not acceptable. Is the only game where they've been really spanked in the tackling. So I'm not going to say that this is like a big thing, but this was definitely why this was the worst performance by North instead of just a bad game. They weren't able to put on pressure. That allowed Adelaide to get a bit more movement, connect more with their forward half. And yeah, it was pretty much a smashing in the forward half of the ground. When Adelaide's forward half versus North's defence, I think Parker was the only one in that back 50 that would have had an acceptable game. And that's including the defensive works of the midfield. So probably as bad as a performance you want to see from North in terms of structure. But at the same time, I'm not going to quite go as hard on them just because they've still had enough this year to suggest improvement. But yeah, as I said, it was not what you want to see. It's probably brought back a lot of headaches for North fans who are otherwise okay treading through this season.
Yeah, I think North and West Coast are very much in very similar positions where like they've identified where their kind of rebuild is currently at, and they're slowly making good progress in at least one or two key areas of improvement. We've seen North over the past couple of weeks get some fairly solid wins and have some fairly solid performances against some quality teams. West Coast, we're going to talk about it in a bit, but they just recorded their 3rd win of the season, and they looked really, really good doing it. So that's, you can identify, now that these teams are a couple of years along in their proper rebuilds, we can finally start to see what they're kind of aiming for, at least in terms of what they want to get out of this season. On the MRO side of things for this game, Rory Laird was fined $2,000 for rough conduct against Caleb Daniel, and James Peatling and Colby McKercher were fined $1,000 each for engaging in a melee, I'm assuming with each other. And yeah, that pretty much rounds out that game. So now we'll jump over to one of the bigger games of the round, probably one of the more entertaining games of the round, and that is Naarm and the Hawthorn at the MCG. A huge clash. This game basically tells us where both these teams are currently sitting at this point in the season, because it was a really good litmus test. And with a 39-point margin, the Demons won out, surprising so many people. We got the tips correct. We feel pretty good about ourselves on that one. 18-12, 120.
I didn't think it was going to be 39, though.
No, I didn't think it was going to be 39 either. But 18-12, 120
No.
to 12-9, 81.
And yeah, it was such a solid performance in the back half by Naarm. Overall, I will say also some beautiful goal kicking this entire game. There was a couple of near goals of the season. I think Nick Watson scored a really, really good one. There was one on the boundary line. Who was it? Was it Josh Weddle? I can't quite remember. But yeah, as I said, there was a few really, really big goals today. Anyway, but what I will say, in this game, Hawthorn's defense actually let them down. I will say it. They just jumped the gun way too often. And this was an interesting game. I was traveling home, and it was like one of those things where I was watching on the KO on my phone, watching the visuals. But I had to turn the radio because the reception was too spotty up in the hills to stream. So I was listening to the commentary, and once they just said, how many times like Hawthorn left their players before they'd actually won the ball in dispute in the half-back line, like it just made so much sense why Naarm were able to get so much out of their forward line, which did feast. Petty, Van Roy, and Jefferson all took their moments for some pretty nice entries for the D. And, it was just, it's so weird still for me that this is a Melbourne team that hated scoring last season. They would get inside 50s and just absolutely butcher them all of last season. And now they're one of the best offenses in the competition. That being said, it wasn't all the Ds, obviously, because it was still 81 points scored from Hawthorn. As bad as he was defensively, he had a pretty bad one-on-one sort of game. Josh Weddle had some great launches forward, so they were rebounding really well off halfback. Carl Amon also had some really good play, but it was that half-forward to forward link-up. Darcy Moore seemed to be the only player in that space on their game. Massimo D'Ambrosio was just off, unfortunately. While Melbourne, all of their outside players, Chandler, Laurie, Langford, all really, really young, just were able to find some great outside forward connection and hit the scoreboard themselves. And it just meant that Melbourne got so much more out of their media reach. Like, they had players that were just so much more potent in their forward line. Whereas, we've talked about it with Hawks personnel. It's why I didn't want to tip them. They're just needing to find a few more avenues to score because they don't have those tall targets. Obviously they had Cal Shadir and Mitch Lewis today, but Cal Shadir was just a bit raw still, didn't really have a good game. And Mitch Lewis was just, well kept, did pop up for a couple of goals. I won't say he had a bad game. Disco Turner as well. Played absolutely fantastic. One of the best defensive games of his career. And it just, as I said, it's just what I was saying last week, the lack of threat from their inside players, the struggles of scoring from stoppage. I don't think it's going to worry them against a fair few teams. But Melbourne's just not one of those teams. I thought that they would win the stoppage scoring. But again, I didn't really think it would be that dominant because it was 2-10 to 3-2 in terms of score from stoppage. So it was a bit of an annihilation for only a minor clearance win and a 5 centre bounce clearance win as well. So
it is a little unfortunate that, whilst Naarm very much were dominant in getting conversion off of the stoppage, it's a little sad that it was 10 behinds and only 2 goals to come out of that. Because that's a lot of really solid effort put in.
No, 10 goals to.
Oh, 10 goals. Oh, in that case,
sorry.
Scratch
so
that.
So it was 10 goals to 3-2. No, Melbourne were absolutely efficient. And that's what I was saying is their centre bounce was so much more damaging. Jack Steele, Tom Sparrow.
I was going to say,
involvements.
Genuinely, from what I saw of this game, Steele and Sparrow were doing so much solid work. They really have become an unsung midfield duo. And that's not even to mention, Max Gawn still doing Max Gawn things as he does every week. And they have Max Heath in there as well. Being able to chip in.
Yeah, unfortunately he missed a bit of the game due to injury, but he was helping out a lot. He was able to get back on the park, I think.
He wasn't listed in the injury report, so as far as I'm aware.
He only played 25% of game time, so he did. I'm pretty sure he had to go for the full HIA because he took the scat.
Oh, yeah, probably would have. Yeah.
Yeah, but he was good when he was there. He was having an impact. It actually sort of, again, gave Hawthorn a bit of an in when he went off. Ned Reeves and Lloyd Meek really didn't have much to go off, but again, Max Gawn, he doesn't need that ruck support. But as I said, he has been very useful because said honestly, Gawn only had 18 hitouts for how good a game he had. He wasn't smashing him. Ned Reeves had 28, Lloyd Meek had 14.
Gordon doesn't
He doesn't
necessarily
need to.
need
He's so good
to
on the ground.
win the hitouts. Exactly. Like, and it's the same. It's the
Yeah.
same with kind of Grundy at this point too. Like, yeah, Grundy can have a huge amount of hitouts, but he doesn't need to because he has such profound impact around the ground, and that's why that's the basis of a modern ruckman. Is it's no longer just about those center bounces or the stoppage. Center bounces, center balls up, I guess, because the bounce doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And and stoppages as well. Like it's just about what they can do around the ground, whether they become a link up sort of player, whether they become um, defensively important and they'll sit in the back line, whether they'll shuffle up forward as a floater and offer a marking up like a marking option. That's why modern ruckmans have become so important to the fundamentals of the game. And you look at Gawn, Grundy, Darcy Cameron when he's fit, Tim English when he's fit. These modern day ruckmen are so impressive in what they do. And it's even with these ruck changes, like they've been able to adapt, and it makes such a huge difference. Especially, and it really does redefine how a midfield kind of operates at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, as I said, I think the other concerning thing, in terms of a Hawthorn perspective, like I've put the knock on Jai Newcombe occasionally for not being involved in score involvements. I actually think he had an okay game in this game. Again, it probably wasn't his. It was a game where he worked hard, won the ball very well, but there was no one in Hawthorn lineup that was just able to win ground balls.
Yeah.
And, as I said, like, yeah, sometimes I've said, he only had 4 score involvements. But, when you have to be so centralized in winning that ground ball, and you have to work so hard, like sometimes it just limits your ability to make the next possession because you're working so hard because you're the only one winning it. People are paying attention to you. As I said, he would have had I think, had Jack Steele running beside him for most of the game, who, again, isn't a tagger per se in this game, but is one of those ones that will, when he's running with you, limit your distribute the ball and all that. So, again, it's just a midfield that's too Newcombe focused at this moment. So, again, Hawthorn, they have some problems. I'm not going to say they're not a contender, but I do think that their midfield is hurting them a lot more than I thought they would this season. Even though they've had players that I think make up a good role in their midfield, they don't have anyone that can take over because, as I said, Josh Ward, Cam McKenzie's still building there. He didn't play, but Connor Nash, as I said, he's really... None of those are players that I think can win the ball consistently up against the best midfielders in the league.
And I know a lot of Hawthorn supporters really want to bank on Will Day coming back in and being that difference maker.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's been so injury prone, hasn't been able to get a consistent preseason in, let alone a season itself. It's a lot to put on someone who doesn't have like that experience yet, and especially when he's had so many injuries already. I get it, he's such an insane talent, and when he has been able to play, he has been such a huge difference maker. But it's very few and far between that you're going to be able to get that out of him until he actually, at this point, may as well just don't try and bring him in this season. Give him the rest of the season off, get him through a full preseason, and then actually make sure his body is right, because you don't want to rush it if you really think he's going to be that kind of talent.
I think it's going to be a bit earlier than that, but I wouldn't play him before the bye.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Because there's only the injury list for one more week listed. But yeah, I would definitely be more conservative bringing him back. But to sort of finish it all off, I'm going to talk about Naarm or Melbourne for the whole season, I guess. Because, as I said, one of the things that I actually, maybe I'm not impressed by it, but I find really good and earnest about them, is they are statistically a very modest team. And as I said, they should be. They have a few old players, but they have a very young core and a very minor spread of high impact players. You've got your Gawn, You've got your Cozzy Pickett. But aside from that, it's really hard to find too many players. Sparrow's turning a bit into that. Jack Steele's sort of playing more of a cameo role these days. So, as I said, they've just got a lot of players that are providing roles at this point and a few leaders. So you could argue pretty stringy list. And yet they are just so direct and so willing to let young players attack that, their cracks are smoothed over by the fact that more often than not, they just don't let the opposition get their hands on them because they're being so aggressive. They're one of the least tackled teams at the moment. They're going to be attacking with a lot of forward options. And what you do, and if you're not afraid to do it, as long as you're not turning the ball over too much, because, again, sometimes you can get the game where you have against Freo, where you just can't get any chance going because, easy turnover goes back the other way. But it does make teams defend deeper against you. Like, you're saying, okay, if you're going to come at us, we're just going to go long, burst through you, easy score. And they've done that to a fair few teams.
Yeah.
So they're basically asking you to gamble. It's like, well, do you want to try and stop us by forcing a turnover? Or do you want to play a bit more defensively than you probably instinctively would think that you could play against us? So, it is still risky. They have to take those dangerous options. But the real positive things is those young kids are consistently taking it. You see some of the kicks that Latrell tries to take, don't always come off, but very, very positive. Harvey Langford's another one. He can make some really nice kicks. And then obviously they still have a few more reliable players like Ed Langdon. Trent Rivers is another one. But, as I said, it's very diverse. And, it's giving these forwards a chance. Harrison Petty, he doesn't take as dominant a performance if some of those kicks inside 450 weren't nice, because he's not like a Charlie Dixon-esque or Jeremy Cameron just balk into a pack and knock everyone over. He needs a bit of decent supply in order for him to function. But they have done that and they're able to get him in. So they're getting so much out of that other players and, some medium players by letting almost everyone in the team have a bit of a license to take a bit of a dangerous kick every now and then, and B, just having an overall simple, effective, forward movement-based attack that, it just, more often than not, generates points. They're one of the best attacks in the competition. In fact, they're the best goals per inside 50 team of the competition. So when they get it in there, they are very dangerous.
They are. It's very impressive that not even half a season with a brand new coach, not even like an interim sort of coach, like an actual brand new coach who came from an entirely different club, has only slightly reshifted their sort of game plan. I think they're still playing a very similar game plan to what they had last season, but with only
the intent. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's still a couple of players in this system that aren't even out there that should be. And the big notable one is still Jack Viney. He hasn't played at all this season. But
it's hard to see where he fits.
At this point, he Jack Steele is kind of playing the role that he would Viney would play, because they when Steele was at St Kilda, he was very much, that high pressure tackling, big tackle sort of player who could also win clearances. That's basically what Viney kind of is when he's in. He's a high pressure player, huge tackler, gets a lot of that ball from his pressure work. But with Steele kind of playing that sort of role, and Sparrow having now moved into full-time midfield duties to take over either Petrarca or Oliver in that case, you can't really see where he kind of fits in anymore. And maybe he just becomes, as far as I'm aware, what he's doing at the moment whilst he's on his injury recovery, quote unquote, is a lot of coaching work as well with that midfield. So maybe that's just kind of what he transitions into at the end of the day. We don't know if he's going to get another game.
We don't actually know. Yeah, we don't even know if he's going to come back this year. Obviously, it's an Achilles with no time frame.
Yeah.
So that's always going to be a bit of a question mark. But yeah, we might also, and I'm going to spring this on you because I completely forgot about this. See the second retirement come from the Melbourne camp
Ah,
because
yes.
we are segueing into Tom Campbell's retirement.
I
Because
was
probably
gonna
only
mention
briefly
it when
going
we
to
were
talk
talking
about
about
it.
the ruck. Because speaking of rucks, it's not just about the
Yeah,
rucks
true.
on field. It is about the rucks off field with Tom Campbell's retirement. Journeyman, four club player,
Mm.
65 games off the top of my head. I'm not
Yep,
looking at the article. Um,
I've got, yeah.
but yeah, like
Uh,
it's such an interesting career he's had because he's been in the system
mm,
for over 10 years, and yet,
yep.
has only just like had had very minimal impact on field because he didn't play that many games.
Mm,
But from what we've been able to see from his experience at the four clubs that he's played at, he's had some
mm.
very important impact off field in terms of like helping out teammates, development of their skills as
Yeah,
well as his own, that sort of stuff.
exactly. Pretty much the example of a consummate professional, and pretty unlucky, to be honest. Like, goes to the Bulldogs, works out, probably going to be the next ruckman after. Oh, who was it? Wasn't Minson into English? Can't have been. Could have been.
I cannot
I can't
remember.
remember. I feel like there was another one in between. Because Tom Boyd took some duties, but like he was a backup. I can't remember. Anyway, I feel like the Bulldogs have just been mucking around for rucks for as long as I can remember. But Tim English exists. He was the person that they ended up backing in. So Tom Campbell goes to the Kangaroos. Goldie's getting older, but he sticks around a bit longer than people thought. So it was like, oh, well, I guess I'll try again. Goes to the Saints. Um, doesn't really seem to do much. And then goes to Melbourne. He's like, okay, back up for Max Gawn. He's starting to play a few less games. Makes sense. Uh, but yeah, then unfortunately picks up a neck injury. And that was that. So,
And
as I said, um,
Melbourne got very
it
lucky
was,
in the fact that they did bring over Max Heath from St Kilda at the same time. Um,
I think that was their like more, um, I think that was their option, but they thought, oh, Max Heath, he did look like a bit of a project coming in.
oh yeah,
Like he's done very well so far. But he did have that project
and
tag
even the couple
now.
of
So
games that he played at
obviously,
St Kilda in his debut year,
yeah.
like he still looked fairly solid for a very young like ruck player, and now he's getting to learn under one of the best in the competition. Like
Yeah,
it's
well, as I said, it's one of those things where, it just made sense because obviously he was an end of contract player by this list. He was probably only ever going to play this year for Melbourne. He probably would have bowed out after that.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, as I said, it just wasn't a workout. Um, but, as I said, for a rookie draft ruckman, falls out of the system, gets back by SSP to the Kangaroos, and, as I said, goes back to his career. As I said, it was yeah, it was just a minor career. There's not really that much to say about him. They tried to put him forward, kicked a few goals, not that many goals per game. Did kick 9 goals in 6 games in 2013, which is not the worst return. But yeah, otherwise, just a player that's more known off field for being a very professional. Every team that's had him has sent as been said to sing his praises high. So as I said, not everyone has such a direct impact of football in terms of just pure games. There's so many ways that you can shape the world of AFL football, and sometimes it's just about being a reliable journeyman, a good person, and for that, I think shall we salute Tom Campbell, 4 Cup player, off into the ether.
Yes. Yeah, like we've talked about this many times. It's not just about your impact on field, it's also about your impact off field. And even if you're a player who, may not get many games in your career, both the men's and the women's in this case too, your leadership skills and your compassion for others and your want to see the team succeed as well as your teammates succeed, that just contributes to the type of quality players that we want in the league. And Tom Campbell is pretty much the epitome of that. And,
Yeah.
whilst, it would have been nice to see a player like him get some, like, have more opportunities. Maybe hit 100 games instead of just 65. He still had a very wonderful career, even though it was
Yeah.
mostly full of injury, which is very sad. But still very solid for all things considered. At the 4 clubs that he played at. But before we transition over to our next game, I'm just going to jump back to the game we were talking about because there was an MRO report for this game with Tom Sparrow fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire, and that is it.
Yeah. Now, shall we go on to probably one of the least talked about games? There was almost no talk in the lead up. Nothing happened.
Nothing at all happened with this one.
Just a regular game of football at Marvel Stadium.
Yes, if you couldn't tell, this is the Carlton versus Western Bulldogs game. I'm not going to mention the margin or the scoreline or anything like that because we do have to talk about the news leading up to it, and that is Michael Voss pulling the plug on his coaching career at Carlton, officially put in the resignation, and it left Carlton in a very interesting position coming into this game because of the fact that they had to rely on an interim coach.
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing because it's always hard to tell what goes on in the inner sanctum and all that sort of stuff, but I legitimately believe that Carlton were going to persist with Voss until the end of the year.
So do I.
I think that if they were to make the call, they would have done it earlier, and I think Voss, to his credit, is just like, okay, we lost to Brisbane by 11. It was fairly reasonable, but this season's going nowhere. The media is just absolutely... I couldn't. I think people forget, how self-conscious you can be just in, regular... when, people are like, oh, I can do this, that, or whatever. I could coach. I could, kick a goal from 30 meters out or whatever. They forget how much people fold under pressure. And that seat is a massive boil of pressure. There is no team I probably want to coach less than the Carlton Football Club at this moment.
Yeah.
When you have some form of expectations and you fall short of it, it is dismal. So he makes a decision to bow out. And following that, they choose to part way with list manager. I've forgotten his name, actually. But anyway, it's the list manager of the last few years, which was interesting. I mean, I guess they sort of have to clean house anyway. Because I guess that was sort of their plan after Voss. So the writing was probably already on the wall for him. But it did signify a bit of a change. Josh Fraser, former Gold Coast Suns player, or for Blazy, he might not be old enough to know, former Collingwood player, number 1 pick in the draft in 1999, and also premiership player as well.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, so... as the media were pointing out, also the first time there's been 2 Gold Coast players coaching a football team at the same time, with the other one obviously being Andrew McQualter. So a bit of fun facts there. And yeah, I think without saying anything that we haven't already really said before, I don't think there's any surprise or there's any real disappointment, I guess, about this decision. I don't think many people can look and say this is the wrong decision. It's more just where to hear from Carlton.
Yeah.
Because as I said, they're in such a weird position where they've got glimpses of a list. They theoretically have the older people to support their list, but time and time again, that hasn't proved the case this season. They've theoretically got a budding list of young talent, but as we've seen, they've sort of been a bit hit or miss so far, especially over the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, as much pressure as he can have coaching football. So, as I said, for Voss himself, I do think that I legitimately think that this was a better tenure than his first, which is obviously very easy when Brisbane were pretty much a basket case when he took over, or a bit after he took over. He took Brisbane and left it in a worse position than when he inherited it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had some lessons from this. But I do want to say, it's just, I've never rated him and his ability to manage midfields, and they look like they should be working, but often enough they just lack a bit defensively. And I think that's just something that's always been trailing around Colin. And it was a problem before he took over the team. Where, as I said, I think it's just a case when you have a coach that was such a good contested player, I think maybe sometimes your view of the game can sometimes be a bit too narrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we sort of saw that this year where I think just his game plan needed to be a bit more flexible. And that's not always him. That's, down to his assistants as well. And I think that they almost built a list that's a bit too much to a contested style strengths than a list that can realistically compete for 4 quarters in an AFL system. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I don't think that they need to they're going to be screwed for 10 years or whatever. There's only minor changes that need to be happen. But yeah, as I said, I think losing Voss is probably the right call. I do think that they could have finished out the year. I don't think what they could do would damage, to be honest, because as I said, they've got right ideas. But they definitely need another preseason to get things right, because how they went about it this year just wasn't it. It's fair to say.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I've already spoken about this at length, both on the podcast and off the podcast. I think a lot of the issues come from the top, in terms of the board of directors and the coterie groups that kind of actually control the entire club and how it functions, and there's a lot of that pressure can be put onto the football department by those higher groups, and that it's basically it's very similar to what Richmond kind of went through in the 2016 sort of era. But in terms of where Carlton go to from here, honestly, I don't really know. I don't know if what kind of coach they want to really be looking for. I don't know if they want someone who is experienced, who's a premiership winning coach or anything like that, or if they want to go with someone who already in their system. Then maybe Fraser actually works out for them, and maybe it's a type of position that he wants to take over from.
Theoretically, he's put his hand down, but things can change.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? It's unlikely, but you never know. That's how it goes. And obviously, we're about to talk about how he did in his first game.
Yes. So yeah, it's very interesting of a time for Carlton, and it's kind of hard to kind of really put into words what we want to expect out of them, not just for the rest of the season, but going into the off season. At this point, it feels like they need to make wholesale changes. But it's kind of hard to really describe what kind of wholesale changes. Is it entirely on-field personnel? Is it off-field personnel? Is it those coterie groups and the board of directors? You need a wholesale cleanup of the entire system to have that kind of change, or is it just simply bringing in someone with fresh ideas and trying to make better use of the skills that your players have and try and mold them into a system that actually works for them? Is it something that one person could actually change more so than 15 different people coming in?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's probably a good time to head to the game now, because I think as positive as this is, and I'll sort of say the score because I'm sort of starting out a bit. It was 74-62, 10-14 to 9-8, Carlton over the Western Bulldogs. But this was so hard to get a read of because, again, Carlton, fantastic to get a win. One of the best fourth quarters you'll see. Really good to get the win after the interim coaches. I did hear the statistic. Apparently, after sacking a coach and having an interim, they have a win success rate of, I think it's about 40%. I heard from the radio, which is pretty good. Considering how often mid-season coaches are from real cellar dwellers. To get 40% win rate is really good. But it's just one of those things where there was a lot of elements of Carlton in this game. West and Bulldogs had a lot of element of struggling in this game as their injury woes continue. But at the end of the day, it just made for this weirdly enthralling contest. Carlton came home massively. They couldn't find territory all night. Had to rely on some nice set shot kicking to stave. As the Bulldogs couldn't find territory all night. Carlton actually had a lot of territory, couldn't quite put it on the scoreboard. And the Bulldogs could only keep with them by some nice kicking for the first 3 quarters. Carlton struggled to turn their decent half-forward movement into score as their forward work was very patchy until the last quarter, where a surprising trouncing in stoppage led Carlton de-toothing the Doggies, who couldn't move the ball on the outside and then suddenly implode on the inside. It was such a weird, bad performance by the entire inside midfield group, in that 4th quarter. Even some of the best, like Bontempelli, he still had moments here and there. Even he wasn't clean. It was probably one of the worst games that I've seen Ed Richards play. Matthew Kennedy had very middling impact. And they just got beaten. Patrick Cripps had a very fantastic night. Jagger Smith actually took a few more insides and bounces. He was playing inside and let Chera play a bit more outside, which I think was a very positive move, actually. I think Chera's sort of been struggling a bit with the inside, so he's gone back more on his outside role. Sam Walsh had a few moments here and there. Probably not the best of the inside group, but definitely one of those ones that sort of picked up in that last quarter when the game was there to be won. And as I said, the Dogs got beaten in a very undog-like performance. It was in the forward line, McKay and Campbell also had really good games. And then the unlikely hero, the one that just came out of nowhere, Matt Carroll. 3 goals, 100% disposal efficiency for 25 possessions. It was really, really solid. And defense for both teams, actually, I want to say, they were good. Legitimately, Dogs defense, considering their personnel, really, really solid. Carlton's defense preventing the Dogs forward line from getting any easy shots. If you look at the scoring shot map for the Dogs, it was very, very sparse. Only 3 shots inside 30 meters. A lot of the set shots were very outwards and a few wide ones. There were a few central long shots, but, you sort of give them up occasionally. Whereas Carlton just got a lot more looks closer to goal. And, as I said, that's sort of the reason why they found scoring a lot easier than the Dogs. But otherwise, for how much territory Carlton had, I think the Bulldogs did a reasonable job defending. Bustlinger had a fairly reasonable night. I think that Selwood, again, performing fairly admirably. And Buku Kamas, I know last week I thought he was a bit mediocre. But this one I think was one of his better performances. I know that they were a bit let down at the very last. But I do think that was more to do with their midfield breaking down. I think when you defend well for so long and then it's just a big wave at the end, sometimes you just have to cop it. It was 70% in the last quarter in the Carlton's forward 50 compared to 30%.
Oh, yeah.
So, at that point, what are you going to do? Because, you're struggling so much to defend. It's late in the game. You're already down so many defenders normally, And also, Lob's obviously playing ruck role as well, which is why he wasn't as featured in defense. It's just, it's what do you do for the Dogs? As I said, they were just let down by their midfield, which just doesn't happen.
Yeah, no,
I know.
It's so weird because we the Dogs are known for being such a well-structured midfield machine. But when they don't have their key ruck out there, it's like their midfield just doesn't really exist, and they're relying a lot more on their half.
I'd say that.
Well, it's not not existent.
I feel like this was the worst that we've seen of them.
It's like they just don't have that kind of explosive impact that they would normally have. With English in and that honestly, it shouldn't. I feel like it shouldn't matter that much. Like, I know clearances
No.
are obviously like such a big thing, especially if you can get it like a
Yeah.
tap, to the right player and stuff
But
like
it's
that.
not. It's never been a hit out to advantage ruck. It's never been like the most dominant win percent hit
No,
out
he
ruck.
hasn't.
Like he's good on
So
the ground,
I don't
but like
understand
it's not
why
that.
it
Yeah.
makes such a big difference to just the way the Dogs play in that midfield. Like, is it
Hmm.
the fact that they're also missing players like Liver, Bonds playing on one leg? Like,
Hmm.
are they? Is it because of the fact that they're also missing their like quote unquote explosive midfield players? Even though they have,
I don't
you've
know.
still got Kennedy out there. Trelaw's been in and he's been
Yeah.
looking alright. There's
I,
they still got good
I think
talent
one
in
of the
that
things.
midfield. You've
Yeah.
got Garcia, who has had some solid impact, and I'm blanking on the names right now, but I know that they are a good midfield team, even when they don't
Hmm.
have their superstars at 100%. But it's just, why does it feel like it is all dependent on Tim English?
Yeah, I don't know. And as I said, it's very easy to get a bit reactionary after one game, but like I definitely think that, it's a fair enough point because as I said there, and obviously there's a bit of bad luck losing Bailey Williams so early. He was looking to have an all right game, but again, it then just felt like everything was so focused on Bailey Dale.
Yeah.
And again, not going to blame his performance. He was kicking at a fairly accurate rate, hitting up long targets, all that sort of thing. But again, it's just when it's so focused on one person, it becomes a bit predictable. And I think that teams sort of work out the shape because if you know that one player is going to kick it out, then if you're forward of the ball, then you're going to be like, okay, Bailey Williams is on my side of the field. I'm going to stay a bit tighter than my opponent and just force this one to be a contest.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if it's the other side, you might be looking to maybe, change your position a bit, maybe play a bit more aggressively, do whatever. But you know what I mean? Yeah, as I said, I think teams have, especially Carlton, who, as I said, they haven't been the worst from defending off halfback. It's really just their forward line that's, sort of left a bit to be desired. A lot of points off turnovers, all that sort of thing. So, you know, um, it is what it is. But as I said, it was just a bit disappointing, especially when the Bulldogs just seemed to get that momentum when they were playing Port last week. And then it just fell apart so easily again. At this point, it's very hard to see them getting a good ladder position come the end of the year. We might talk about it. I'm not sure if we're going to look at the ladder this week. I forgot if we did it last week, but I do feel like the top six is getting a bit more certain.
Yeah.
Or at least the group of players, teams that are in it are getting a bit more foreseeable. But yeah, as I said, these are just games where you can't really give them up, and you still give the Bulldogs some credit. Like they're still playing pretty well considering that the players that they're forced to play at this point. It was just a winnable game gone begging. And as for Carlton, there's a lot of positives for them. As I said, A, getting the win. B, Jack Ison had a really fantastic game.
He
Had
did.
a first goal too. Really lifted in that last quarter. You had a lot of Jagger Smith also having a fair bit of impact. And Billy Wilson as well. Had a decent enough game. Harry Dean coming back as well. Very good for that defense. So,
Yes, very
as I
much so.
said, they don't have the best players down there, but, they are performing fairly well, at least in this contest. And it just gives them a base to work out. Obviously, I don't think Josh Fraser will end the year on a 100% win rate. I do think that he will lose his first game. Hopefully closer, considering that Carlton, I'm pretty sure, have Port next week. But yeah, or Yaartapulti as it will be, obviously second round of Doug Nicholls. But
Yes.
yeah, there's not much else to say because this was a really scrappy game. Like in terms of the flow, like as I said, it was pretty yeah, it was scrappy. It was ugly to watch, but as I said, it was nice for Carlton, but very hard to watch for Dogs fan. As I said, this just doesn't feel like the season for them after such a strong and impressive start.
Yeah, it's they're definitely in a very weird position right now. Now going on to our Sunday games. Like, speaking of the top eight, as we were talking about just before, there is a team in this game that is very much a top four contender at the moment. Like, they're playing some fantastic groups of footy, And this one was no different on the MCG. Obviously, we're talking about Essendon versus Walyalap, and with a 43-point margin, the Dockers did win out 16,804 to 8,1361.
Yeah, and look, honestly, it looks so ominous early. Like the first half was really, really dismal for Essendon. Don's got absolute torture at the middle with some of the worst stoppage defense you will see to start a game of football. And it was just players having too much free space after a bowl up that led to a really fast free goals to start the game. And it looked like Walyalap were going to win by 100. But the Dons did eventually come back. They slowed the game up. And their, kick mark football at the back actually sort of helped them a tiny bit because, again, I don't think they ever had the ability to get enough offense from that to have a winning score, and I don't think they could have started the game out like that, but it definitely made the game look a bit more respectable. If the Dons could kick straight, it probably also would have looked a bit more respectable too, 8-13, but again, sort of like the, what other game was it, where team was playing good? I think it was the Carlton game or something. I can't remember. But it was due to some really nice defense by Walyalap. And on the flip side, the Dons absolutely got mauled. Their defense, Voss kicked 4 at halftime, ended up with 5. Tracy looked ominous, but they did buckle in. And as I said, the efforts for some of these young kids who were absolutely beaten in the first half of the game. I'm talking about Nick Bryan coming back from injury. Lockie Blackiston absolutely mauled in the first half. One just terrible. He lifted in the second half, and as I said, he really could have, put his head down, lower his colours, just accept that he's been beaten for the night. But he did actually lift. And Nate Caddy too. I do think the efforts of those players to lift up. But on the same time, it was the efforts of their leaders, the ones that should be starting, providing those consistent performance week in, week out at the start that was really concerning. I think Merritt was pretty much all right for the whole game. There was a few periods where it was down, but, that was the same with the old players. But I think players like Carl Langford, pretty much not a factor in the first half. Andrew McGrath, even though the bowl was back there, his bowl use wasn't really that great until late in the game, where it really did lift. But again, we're talking about like when the game was, there to be won. Will Setterfield, I'm going to be a bit less harsh on him because he is just back, but he was another player that just sort of flipped on a dime. He was almost a liability to start with and then sort of got back into the game. And, so on and so forth. Technically, Peter Wright fits in this group, but he did get banged up early, so I'm going to give him a pass. He almost looked a bit dire because he went to the rooms just after the second set of bounce, and Freo got the goal straight away. So, as I said, it was looking a bit bad, but yeah, he continued his pretty solid role as sort of a ruckman, mainly that also goes up forward. And yeah, as I said, it was just, I think the only real concerning thing for Walyalap is that they really had the chance to put the foot on the throat. Like, they had no hope, Essendon, at halftime. They were, really, really good. Walyalap defended the lights up, but they did feel like they were mucking around a bit with the ball in transition. They took one too many easy options when the scoring avenues dried up later, when Essendon fixed up the stoppage advantage. Like, when Essendon fixed their shape a bit, it really made Walyalap look a bit vanilla. And, I'm not going to say, they really needed to, because they're a West Australian team. They have to travel more. They have to plan a bit more in their season. They can't always just go hammer and tong every game. So, maybe you can, say it's all right that they sort of, I wouldn't say put the foot off the gas, but, they weren't trying to force the matter. But, as I said, it was just so... I think the really good thing for Walyalap is that defense. That was a 4-quarter performance.
Yeah.
The Dons kicking 13 behinds was not a fluke. Chapman, Cox, Ghostface, who is Oscar McDonald.
Yes.
I realise that no one else calls him Ghostface except for me. Were astute as ever. Chapman especially. I thought he, some of the spoils and some of the work that he's had I talked about defenders that are both good with ball use and as a one-on-one sort of defender, did really well. And, as I said, he had a really great game and shut down. I think he was on... Can't quite remember, actually.
Was he on?
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
Oh,
I mean, you probably had more rotation of players. The wingers that sort of go forward.
yeah.
Like your Nick Coxes, Nguyen I actually saw play a bit forward. He almost got a nice goal. Just put it a bit short, but yeah. So they were mucking around a bit. Archie Perkins is another one who again has still been reasonable enough. Since his comeback, which has been a bit of a surprise. But yeah, as I said, apart from that, it was really just a few plays here and there that lifted, that made it a bit more even for the Dons. But I definitely think that they're not going to rest on their laurels here. Like, there was so much structurally that they needed to fix in the first half, that they still have to have a buckle down review.
Yeah.
But I think there's still a bit of tender praise to be given for some of the turnaround efforts. And as I said, for the Dockers, they're going pretty well. Shai Bolton had some really nice goals. His first goal was absolutely beautiful, and then I'm pretty sure he linked up with Tracy. In fact, I think it was the first goal was Tracy linking up to Shai Bolton, and then the next goal was Bolton leading up to Tracy. So that was a nice little switcheroonies to start that. And yeah, as I said, Mason Cox too, very, very handy. I do think, one of the biggest things, I will say Nick Bryan, I'll give him so much props, because Jackson early looked like he was going to tear the game apart. And then his performance was limited, and it's probably his worst performance of the year, only because some of his others were so high.
Yeah.
And for that to come from Nick Bryan, and obviously a half injured Peter Wright, should be given a fair bit of props to. Mason Cox, as I said, that synergy with him tend to work pretty well. Didn't quite hit the scoreboard as it sometimes does, but I think they, did pretty well out of it mostly.
That's pretty solid.
Yeah.
I guess a question that I have for you in regards to this game is,
yeah,
do you think with Michael Voss being now out of the coaching seat, do you think Brad Scott could be next down the line, or do you think that? Or do you think
you said Voss, and I was thinking of
Patrick? Or do you think that Essendon are going to back him in, because it's very clear what he's trying to do with this team, and it's just gonna there's a little bit more faith in terms of a Bombers rebuild than there is of a Carlton rebuild.
I think the Bombers, it's so clear what they're trying to do. And I know I'm just repeating a point that Brad Scott made in his press conference, but
he's not wrong though. That's the thing, and that's why.
Yeah.
And that's why, in my opinion, I think he's safe as a coach, at least for this year.
I would agree. Yeah, I think for this year,
because
I do think that some of the problems is, again, getting the most out of their leaders.
Yeah,
I do think, as I said, they just seem to rely on getting us back on the youngsters, but I think that's been a problem for quite a while for the Dons. I do think that culturally, they've always been a bit reliant on the something else coming in and fixing their problems. And I've said this at times about the Dodoro era, where it was almost insulting for the players, because as I said, it will be like, oh, we just need to bring in this name and this bit of area will be fixed up. They never looked as much internally.
Yeah.
And when they don't look internally, they're almost not asking internally for players to lift when they need to. As I said, the natural leaders who will always do that, like Zach Merritt, back in the day, Dyson Heppel, all those sort of players would just do that. But then you lead to players like Carl Langford, who, have sort of found it a bit awkward, especially in this game. He just sort of, he's had a very hard time finding a fit. He's come up a bit higher up of the ground, and he just hasn't had much impact. Andy McGrath, I still put in that basket. Maybe a bit harsh for the captain, but I do think that he tends to come and go a lot more from what I would like out of a captain. Zave Dersma, again, another one that's you sort of understand it because it's a bit injury affected. Not too much of a contested player these days, but the fact that he weighs so much, as I said, they've got players that they're sort of convinced that's going to be their next core that you just don't quite trust. And, it's going to be interesting where they go next year. Because as I said, as much as I can see like a lot of solid progress, I think if they don't make a few list choices, I think that they will be digging in their heels a bit and just flounder a bit. And I do think like that will be the end of the Scott era if that happens, obviously. But as I said, it's just you've got to be optimistic, and you've got to be careful about how you approach, doing this sort of rebuild. Because again, it's about putting enthusiasm into the young players, getting them to believe that they can win any game. But you still need to make the choices necessary when it comes to that. And maybe that's a bit where, people have a few questions about Brad Scott and his history, especially at North Melbourne.
Yeah.
Where, as I said, he was a bit harsh. He was so burnt. It's how does he manage that now that he has to make those decisions again?
Well, I think the Brad Scott of the North Melbourne era and the Brad Scott of this era are different in terms of how they approach how they approach coaching. I think his time working at AFL directly has very much changed his coaching ethos. And that's why I think he's very much in the mindset of sticking with a solid core, not trying to make too many wholesale changes. Besides last week, when he was able to bring in some of the more, I guess, quote unquote, higher rated talent on this list. But trusting his core, trying not to make any huge amount of wholesale changes, and just seeing how they develop together. I really like that mentality that he's bringing, and we've seen it actually produce decent results. But obviously, when they come up against the tougher opponents, which is basically most of the teams above them.
Pretty much everyone sans West Coast and Richmond.
Yeah. It's very difficult to see where, I guess, where the end of the tunnel is. They've very much got a long journey to go before
the Bombers of last year and this year is that their worst players are making a lot more of an impact than they used to.
Yeah.
Like they were putting players on the park that were, you clearly, like the first year of Sardar Hawley, even some of the players that start to lose a bit of touch, like the last year of Mac Guelphy, the start of there was another one that started off a bit rough. Can't think of his now. It's just sort of fallen out of the side. But anyway, they sort of work it out and all that. So,
yeah.
Archer Day Wicks.
Yes.
Started off a bit rough too. So, So as I said, they've sort of started to build off that. They've got a few players that they're sort of working on. As I said, Archer May is sort of fine for now, but I'm sure they'll be looking for the next key forward as well as they sort of start to look at more options. I think Langford needs to eventually leave this side. Peter Wright still probably got maybe 1 or 2 years, but you've got to be thinking ahead of time when it comes to key forwards. So, as I said, they've got enough there. It's just the growth still has to be a bit next year, and then probably start to see the exponential growth in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, they're very much in a huge rebuilding phase. But they're very much behind when it comes to North Melbourne and West Coast in terms of their rebuilds. So it'll be, and with Tassie coming in the next couple of years, it's going to be very interesting to see how Essendon can vie for talent and how they're able to. Well, granted, honestly, I think a lot of the young talent that they have now, that they have brought in from the draft, is really solid.
Except key players.
It's the key players that they're missing, and I think they may have to go to the trades to try and find those sorts of areas of key talent. Like they need a decent key fullback and decent key full forward, because Langford isn't cutting it anymore. Peter Wright will retire in the next couple of years. Like, so you need to have that bit more of reliability. And you've got Caddy, and he's developing into a really solid player, but he's not.
He plays too high up there.
He plays too much up the ground.
Him. But he will be a good talent.
Yes.
Like, there's no doubt his positive impact. I'm not saying he's
It's
a bad
mostly
player,
those key position roles that they're missing,
Mm.
and then just getting that development time into the younger players to kind of round out the core that they need around the ground. But otherwise, like,
Yeah, because yeah,
they're
it's a good
looking.
point because I said, like, with Tasmania, like we saw with the Gold Coast and GWS, like, when you think of Gold Coast, yeah, it wasn't all really good players, but you know, a couple of them with what's his name? Obviously you had Dixon and Lynch, and then the one that really didn't work out. Was it Sam May? I can't remember.
I can't
But yeah,
remember who the other tall forward was.
basically all the really good key forwards get taken up in an expansion side because they just go, okay, we're going to take all of them and then see which ones work. Same with GWS with Cameron, McCarthy, the one that went to Hawthorn,
That would be Jonathan Patton.
Jonathan Patton, Jonathan Giles too. I think he was a high-rated player at the time and just didn't really pan out. So traded a lot as well when they didn't work out. GWS, that was such an underrated period of list management. The start of the GWS expansion, what they did with trading in and out tall forwards, got so much return from them. Brilliant. But Essendon, they will be paying a premium if they need to get a key forward in 3 or 4 years' time. So they need to do it now.
Yes, and which is kind of why, like, in retrospect, you know, the whole failed merit thing could come back to bite them because having those picks now probably could have, you know, opened up a lot of doors. But you know, hindsight's 2020. We'll see in this trade period whether something like that will make a big difference.
Key forwards are hard to pick early.
They are,
like,
especially because they take a while to like fully develop because they're tall players.
Like they are they're the most likely ones to bust out of all the top 10 picks. In my opinion,
there's a lot more pressure on being a full forward than there is in being a ruck or a fullback. I feel like.
Yeah.
So
anyway.
All right. On the MROs,
rebuilding.
Before we get to that, there is MRO news. It's at the bottom of the doc, just by the way.
Okay.
On the MRO side of things, there are four charges from this game. Heath Chapman was fined $1,000 for being an instigator of a melee. Xavier Dersma was fined $2,000 for rough conduct against Isaiah Dudley. Murphy Reed was fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire. And Zach Merritt was also fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire.
It's interesting. I thought he's number 2 for Essendon. Was it that one? I can't remember which game it was actually. Maybe I'm thinking of another game. Anyway. Yeah, he sort of roughed up someone after the kick, and Chapman got a bit upset about it. And I thought he was going to get in trouble, but anyway, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter too much, I guess.
Yeah. So we just move on to another team that's sort of having to rebuild. They're just rebuilding themselves. They're taking the broken bones out, putting the broken bones back in because they've got no other options.
Yeah, it's not looking good for Richmond, ladies and gents. So obviously we're going to Marvel Stadium where Euro-Yroke faced off against Richmond. I was at this game, and with a 36-point margin, the Saints did win out 16-13-109 to 11-7-73. You know, there were patches of good moments from this game. Debutant Noah Roberts-Thompson kicked 2 goals, also joining the first kick, first goal club. So a big fan of that. Congratulations to him. But we did come out of it with some injuries again. Hopefully, we're hoping that a couple of them are not too bad, and that the emergencies that we did have listed are perfectly okay to be played this Friday night. Again, it's a 5-day break, so it's a little bit stressful. But otherwise, yeah, like St Kilda did some really solid work around the ground. And speaking of rucks, TDK was kind of at the forefront of a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I didn't watch this match. I was sort of hanging around with my granddad still because we mainly just watched that match and then had a bit of afternoon tea. But from what I heard, it was really just, I'd say it was like more of a vulture picking off a carcass of a half alive Richmond, because it's not like Richmond weren't trying or, you know, the Saints weren't the complete reason why they were in such a damaged state. It was just a bit of an easy feed. St Kilda just did the right things. to a Richmond side that was still trying, but just couldn't quite have everything in terms of consistent ball use, offense. Actually, no, I'll take that back because I think the midfield was really the only side that was like bad. Because, like, I think you'll take 11-7 from the forward line that you had. The Robert Thompson's win, even though both had a bit of a down game, Johnson Pelly and Forsett both kicked goals, which is nice to see. And their backline too was really, really decent. Again, it's just that ball use in both transition and in some of the midfield work. It wasn't quite, it wasn't quite a complete domination, but did allow for St Kilda to get Euro-Yroke, to get their territory.
It could have been a lot worse, essentially.
Yeah, because they spent 38% time in their forward half with the Tigers. So 11-7 is really fantastic. There was a 23 loss difference in inside 50s. And Euro-Yroke, as I said, in that movement, from what I heard, was pretty much uninhibited. And it could have been a lot worse if Richmond's defense still didn't have a pulse. Hugo Garcia, probably the best thing to watch out of this match because he was absolutely huge.
Absolutely.
2 goals, 25 possessions, 80% efficiency. Probably like not the most impressive stats ever, but when you were watching that game, you really saw his impact. And I know I was just glancing at the highlights, but it was really some really nice work. And otherwise, a tiny bit of maybe not a scrappy game, but definitely for Richmond it was a bit. But I felt like he was the one dictating class, if that makes sense.
This very much was a game, that had its moments, at least for Richmond. There were some very solid highlights. Again, as you'd mentioned, the Jaunt and who am I thinking of?
Forsett.
Yes, Liam Fawcett, thank you. Being multiple goal scorers, I think that was very solid of them. Tom Lynch didn't have a huge amount of impact in terms of score, but he did a lot of work in terms of, creating contests, getting ball to ground whenever possible, helping out everyone else around in our forward line rather than just, trying to mark the ball himself, because he was primarily up against Cal Wilkie, who thankfully did not get ruled out due to his back issue from last week's game. So it's very solid for him. He did also have a very solid game. There was one or two instances where they were kind of uncharacteristic of him. But I think in terms of just his defensive performance, Cal Wilkie is still incredible. But yeah, Hugo Garcia, like what a player! Like he is becoming like one of the next midfield superstars, especially for St Kilda. And without Naz,
also I didn't say it, 10 clearances as well.
Yeah, like
that was like one of the biggest things.
He had a solid game, and even with Naz out there, it allowed him to shine so much more because Naz is normally that big ball winner for them, at least at the moment. So being able to kind of show that St Kilda have brought in players that are having really solid development, and like are starting to really shape how this midfield looks, especially when considering they've lost Steele, they lost Max Heath in terms of ruck stocks, which is why why it's really good that they have TDK. So TDK and Rowan Marshall.
I think they got TDK first.
Oh yes, I know, but
we don't need Heath now.
The fact that they were able to keep Marshall from going to Geelong. Who actually had a really solid game as well. I think both of them had really good performances this week. It shows very solid signs as terms of where St Kilda's trying to climb up to. I think they'll definitely make top 10. Although it's going to be really close. That'll be dependent on, I guess, their back end, because I think they have a kind of rough schedule on their back end.
Maybe.
But in terms of Richmond, I think Jack Ross had a very solid game. I think Tim Taranto had a solid game. Nick Floston, even though I think he should have been ruled out for the dump tackle that he did, he did not get ruled out for that. Fun fact. He had a solid game otherwise. Ben Miller had a solid game. There were definitely moments that I was very impressed with and very happy with. But yeah, it's just our transition isn't very good. We make a lot of mistakes. We're very fumbly. It's very easy to capitalize on those.
Yeah, for this game, the center work too. I will say not thanks to Ollie Hayes-Browns, who, as I said, led the clearances, 5 clearances, only 10 hit-outs, but I mean, it's Ollie Hayes-Brown against 2 in-form
Yeah, and he
ruckmen.
was rotating with
Drew
Noah
6 free
Bolter, who
kicks too.
technically isn't a ruck either.
Yeah. So, but I think the disappointing thing is, like, you had Jack Ross, 4 clearances, was it? I think Tim Taranto only had 2. So there's just, I think, as a Taranto from the stats, like, was very good with ball use. Jack Ross as well. But it was just the ball winning ability from players not named Jack Ross. That would be the most disappointing.
Yeah, it is.
Jack Ross is, like, honestly, I would say he's had the best year for
He's
I think
he's
overtaken
easily leading our Jack Dyer medal right now. If we
Yeah.
were to do like the calculations now on how their scoring works, he'd easily be leading it. He has had such a good season so far, especially in how such a dire of a season it is. I've been very impressed with his performance. I think he'll end up being our next captain. I was very happy with the way he led himself in terms of being the interim captain for those 2 weeks, whilst Timmy was out. My big question now is, I have no idea how this Friday is going to look, and I am very concerned by that.
Beg the AFL for a concession player top up.
I
mean, you're eligible.
It is confirmed that we have been in contact with the AFL about top up players. They would be players off of our VFL list. So we could bring in our VFL captain in Lachlan Street. We could bring in defender Mataz, El Noor. We have a lot of actually really, really good talent in our VFL system right now. And a lot of other clubs keep stealing from us. Like you look at West Coast, they took Tom McCarthy from us, and look at how good of a player he is for them right now. Like,
yeah, it's one of those things where it's sort of ironic, really. Like, as I said, it's like a cupcake bin at both ends. You know what I mean? You're only left with like a very sliver to work with. So but as I said, the only other time, as I said, from my knowledge, that it's happened was the West Coast COVID era.
Yes,
and
that is the only time.
Although it's fun seeing the waffle players coming in, getting a bit of a chance, like, it didn't exactly scream. I think the AFL's just got to grant it, because you don't make this option because you're trying to scam the league out of something or whatever. Like, this is just a desperate move just to lack of options. But, like, in terms of managing and in terms of trying to prevent future injuries, I think it is imperative that they do get a few top-up players before the mid-season draft. And, as I say, because I still remember, like, it was Hamish Brayshaw's couple of games that he played for the Eagles when he was a top-up.
Oh, yes.
I think Zane True was one of the ones that actually made it onto the list the next year after being a top-up player.
I think so. The name seems familiar as someone who had more game time than just that brief period.
Well, I'm not sure if it was 100% picked up in the top-up, but I vaguely remember him being one of those players. But as I said, it was really, not that much. And I think, didn't Will Schofield come out of retirement as well?
Maybe?
I'm pretty sure he did.
I can't remember. I feel like it's... that could just be something you're making up, honestly. But I mean, if we kind of...
I vaguely remember, because I was still on the podcast, and he was talking about, like, getting fit and all that. I don't think he played a game, but he played for East Fremantle. Not for East Fremantle, against East Fremantle, I'm pretty sure.
Well, I mean, there's still quite a few, like, retired AFL players in their 30s that are playing for VFL teams. Like, and even let's go to Tassie for example. Robbie Fox, who's currently their captain. He was delisted by Sydney, currently playing for Tassie. Likely will stay on Tassie's list when they transition into the AFL.
You would think. It would be a burn of the century if he applied for the mid-season draft. I don't know if he can. It's probably written in his contract. There's like, nah, you're staying here.
I don't entirely know how Tassie's VFL side comes into the mid-season kind of conversation. But in terms of like just this game, there were unfortunately 4 injuries. Only one of them, at least major, being a hamstring injury to Campbell Gray. That happened in the, I think, start of the second quarter. Sam Cumming came off late, very, very late in the fourth with a corked quad. So he should be okay. Luke Trainer and Steeler Green both came out of that game with dislocated thumbs during the game. They had scans on them, I believe, this morning
Yeah.
as of recording, just in case of any further damage, but they should be okay to go. So, provided our emergencies that we had listed for this game are actually fit, McKelty, who was managed this week, he was technically listed as an emergency. So, provided he's actually still fit and good to go, he'll play. Caleb Smith, who just came off the injury list, if he's actually fit, he'll probably come in. There is a possibility that we don't have to get VFL concessions from the AFL.
You still,
but we need
it's not going to happen for this week anyway, because you can't just bring a player in on Wednesday and have them match ready for what was it, Thursday or Friday?
Yeah, correct. But it is a little concerning that everything the issue with our injury list is that they're all medium term, so we can't put someone on the long term injury list like we've had to with Gibcus again. So that minimizes our options for the mid-season draft coming up.
I think they only have 2, don't they?
At the moment we've only got 1 from what I'm aware of. Oh no, we might have 2. We might have had one kind of carrying over
the long term. Yeah.
And then obviously Gibcus, that gives us another option. We might, depending on what goes on with Smiley, because he's currently over in the US seeing a conditioning guru, just to try and figure out why our conditioning sort of system isn't working for him. If he ends up dropping back onto the long-term injury list, that does open up a third option. But that remains to be seen as to whether that's going to happen and whether we'll be able to kind of figure something out.
Sorry, I shouldn't look so happy. When you said
Smiley,
Richmond condition system isn't working for him, you probably could have left the for him bit out of it.
You're not wrong. I'll be honest, you're not wrong. Anyway,
a bit of pain.
On the MRO side of things, there are 2 charges from this game, with Marcus Windhager and Seth Campbell both fined $1,000 each for contact with an umpire. And that transitions us now out to the west, where Walitj-Marawar, also known as the West Coast Eagles, hosted the GWS Giants, and with a 17-point margin, probably the biggest upset of the round, because I don't think anyone picked it. The Eagles did win this game 13-10, 88 to 10-11, 71.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, it was a rough 5 rounds for the Eagles, and they really returned some optimism to the Eagles faithful, as well as Walitj-Marawar, as I do think this was pretty much as 4-quarter performance that you can have for the Eagles against a very wasteful Giants. It was a very slow game to start. I sort of switched it off and then returned to it about the halfway mark. But yeah, there was really not much happening straight at all. You could tell that the Giants' movement was fairly off. The Eagles were sort of looking a bit better, but not very complete. Couldn't really hit up some link-ups. But then the sparks really started in the second quarter for Walitj. Reed, Kelly, and Murdoch all had great, I've written third, but I think it was second quarters, and started a bit of midfield domination against the Giants. This led to a big rotation of players attended centre bounce for the Orange team, and while it did patch up some stoppage losses, the big flow-on effect was, as I said, their back half movement went from bad to abysmal. And I think it sort of affected some of the confidence of their back half players. Compared to normal, Ash and Idan had absolutely stinkers in terms of impact on game. Where Whitfield got tagged by Murdoch, and it really, really worked. I sort of mentioned last game how the weight of disposal efficiency for the Giants sort of weighted on those 3 players. And when you put some pressure on Whitfield, it really had a big visible effect for such a small move. And it should be alarm bells for the Giants. Not necessarily losing to the Eagles. The Eagles had some good pressure and all that, but it's just how easily the Giants fall apart these days when certain things don't go their way. I know they've had a few injuries. I know their centre bounce unit isn't as good as it can be, but that's not all of it. I think that the more and more I see the Giants, the more and more like there's some systematic flaws in their team, and I have some long-term doubts about them, especially this year, maybe for the next couple.
Yeah,
Um,
it's very concerning that, after a lot of us consider the Giants to be one of those teams that could be really strong contenders. Even in the earlier parts of the season when they started having these big injury issues in their midfield, we still thought, they'll bounce back. Like, they've still got enough talent in there to still have such a huge impact against the like other contending teams. But like they've kind of just capitulated to like a shadow of their former selves. Like they're
mm,
we've seen some positive things out of their forward line. It's good to see Aaron Cadman, start to come into his own this season. Um,
mm.
Jesse Hogan, he's had ups and downs because of injury. Um, and then, you've got, your Jake Stringers rotating through there, your Brent Daniels rotating through there, which is good to see Brent Daniels back again now that he's had some consistent games. It's been good to see him out there. But it's just like, it just feels like they've just disconnected, and then they don't feel as
Yeah.
cohesive as they had been not even only a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, because as I said, like, yeah, losing the West Coast at Optus, it's whatever. Giants still have a lot of injuries. But as I said, there's just like not much from the talent that they have, which is still decent. I mean, it's not like they were playing a younger team than West Coast. It's not like they didn't have some real match winners. Obviously, Clayton Oliver, still had a really good game. Like Lockie Ash, I mentioned that his bowl use was worse, but it's not like he had no impact. Um, and as I said, Finn Callahan, yeah, he had a worse game than usual. But it's still a solid player in there. When you're looking at West Coast, where they only have a few solid performers in that midfield unit, and they only have a few players in the back line. As I said, their back line, who was like much younger, outperformed the Western Sydney Giants. And, these, if it was like the first year of Max Grueski, you can sort of say, Aaron Cadman sort of really got beaten. Jake Riccardi was um, well awful, like smashed by Rhett Bazza, had no impact. And, even the ruck contests, he really was sort of mediocre. In fact, I saw a lot of contests which a player we're going to talk about. Um, you know, he had so many opportunities just grabbing the ball out of the ruck and trying to hit the goals. He really should have had more than 2 goals won. And I am talking about Bailey, Jaylee, Gilliams, the big BJ. He was absolutely phenomenal. He was a match winner in his own right. He was part of the reason why we're talking about this title in terms of our episode. He was phenomenal. And he really outbodied Kieran Briggs at time. He wasn't bad, mind you. Like, you could tell some of the dominance was really coming when, again, Aaron Cadman had to take a few contests. I think Grueski might have taken a few as well. But, man, it was just a bit of a domination. He took some really nice, good marks inside 50. Again, he probably should have had some forward 50 just ruck goals, and he had 41 hitouts. It was absolutely fantastic.
I've got his full stats here if you want me to read them off, just to kind of highlight like how much of an impact he had, especially against Kieran Briggs. 41 hitouts, 7 to advantage, 7 clearances, 16 disposals, 11 contested possessions, 2 contested marks out of 3 marks total. 2 of those marks were also inside 50. 2 goals, 1. A fantastic scoreline considering he doesn't normally push up all that often. 7 score involvements, 9 tackles, 15 pressure acts, and a 1%er and a spoil at the same time. Like, that's easily, it's his best game for the club since being recruited.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think
7
it shows.
Score involvements, 5 goals as well.
I think it shows. That
7 score involvements, 5 launches.
Yes,
I think not 5 goals.
I think it shows that, like, whilst he may not be able to contend with some of the better rucks in the competition, he's started to really come into his own in terms of a developing ruck, and is at least someone
Yeah.
who can be relied upon for that kind of midfield balance, especially when you've seen around him, like Harley Reid having a fantastic game, Tim Kelly coming through a really solid bit of form, Elliot Yeo looking really solid, even though he's not going at it as hard as he normally would due to his injury concerns. Um, you've got Jake Waterman up at the front, leading and doing some fantastic work. He finally hit a bit of form again and is looking very solid. You've got Tyler Young, former Richmond player, looking very solid down back. Um, and Tom McCarthy coming off of halfback, a very solid performance from him once again. Milan Murdoch, as you'd already mentioned, absolute standout game for him too. Like, there's so many.
Yeah, it's weird. You read the stats and you're like, oh, 2 goals, not many possessions. But what he did on Wheatfield was absolutely phenomenal.
And yeah,
like,
it's
that
about
was
what you do with those disposals is what matters.
Yeah.
And like, these players, whilst they may not be winning every game, they may not be having great performances every game, they're in a good place and they're starting to develop really well as a core. And that's all that you've really wanted to get from a Qualter on this team, is just consistency and really highlight what kind of direction you're going as a club. And I think the West Coast Eagles are finally starting to like hit that bit where we can see where they're going. And now it's just about getting that more development time into that core and find the players to build around them, to develop them into like that solid team that we know that they can be.
Yeah, because as I said, when they had that 2-win streak, as we already sort of saw what it was. It was just like how much they sort of lost. Once they started losing, it was like, oh, will they actually get back into shape? Especially when things seem to be going against them. You lose Edwards, and as I said, like the Giants, as I said, they were a team where you could sort of maybe not see this coming, but I think, people tend to forget, because I said they did get a wave of players back and then they just lost a few straight away. So again, they're not Bulldogs or Richmond level bad, but like they're still one of the, like, they're bottom 5 in terms of injuries.
Yeah.
Let's make no mistake about that. And it is affecting the season. But as I said, like, there is no real reason why that this forward line performed that badly against a trying but still has Rhett Bazzo in it back line for the Eagles. Like, no offense to Bazzo. Apparently he's been doing pretty well in the waffle. I think his backcraft has developed. But, like, again, like, Rhett Bazzo is, like, really a defender of necessity rather than what he was really designed to be doing on a football field.
Yeah. And, like, one player that we haven't even...
Best game, so...
One player we haven't even talked about, who we've idly mentioned throughout the season so far, it kind of really highlights, more so his former club, rather than the club that he's at now, and that's Jayden Laverde. Like, the fact that Jayden Laverde is one of the few players on the Giants who had a very, very solid game. I think that more so tells you, where the Bombers are more so struggling than where the Giants are currently struggling.
Yeah, well, first of all, the fact that he was the best defender, because he still coughed up a couple of moments, but, as that he tried hard, and his limitations when he plays, and,
this is also true.
Compared to his expectations, Laverde had a fantastic game, but yeah, as I said, it's just, one of those things where... very much, and like I think I mentioned it, I didn't expect Laverde to be playing as many games, mind you. I definitely felt that like it just wouldn't fit with the amount of talent that the Giants have in their back line. Obviously, Sam Taylor being out sort of plays a big factor into this. But you can't really ask that much more of him. Like, he's not going to turn into a suddenly different player, and there's still elements of Laverde from his stint at the Bombers in the Giants, but as I said, they work out the defense around him, and it's like, while I'll say that again, I think West Giants have dropped off a lot in their defense over the last couple of years. I don't think like it's particularly one-on-one. It's just how exposed they get from stoppages. It's how much pressure they get going the other way. and also some of their ball use as well. Like, again, outside of those main players, as I said before, they tend to turn the ball over, and Walitj tend to, they made a big example of that. I said it was very even, the score from stoppage and turnover. 8-4, 52 from turnover, 5-6, 36 from stoppage, minor stoppage win from GWS, but I mean, you're still talking about West Coast midfield. So, you know what I mean? It was just, 4-1 from centre bounce from West Coast as well. That's, when I was talking about the big Bailey and him having an influence, even though the stoppages were fairly even from the starting bounce or not bounce, as I said, it was really big to see. But again, ball use, I mean, it was pretty bad from both teams. But the fact that the Giants' ball use was worse than the Eagles was really telling. And as I said, it really made back half movement absolutely abysmal for both teams. But again, the Giants just don't have the inside midfield capability to be a forward half team.
No.
And as I said, the fact that West Coast beat them is a bit dire, really, in that specific category. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As I said, the fact that, as I said, with roughly the same amount of talent, a lot less talented forward line, West Coast, just from finding better connections, better avenues, are able to beat them. And it's, partly just due to better midfield use. Harley Reid, who we haven't even mentioned, had one of the best games of his career. As I said, Tim Kelly had one of the better games, and so on and so forth. So, as for the Giants, they had a bit more of the ball. They just, didn't really do that much with it. And it's been the same thing all year. There's a lot of handballs, a lot of moving the ball back and forth, but not enough penetration, and definitely not enough connection when they hit that forward line.
Yeah, exactly right. Before we actually, I will just briefly mention the MRO side of things for this game. And there's only one charge this week, and that is Lockie Ash. He was fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire. But I want to mention the rising star because it also comes from this game, and it is 19-year-old young halfbacker Josh Lindsay.
Ooh, nice.
He finished the game.
Yeah, no, Josh Lindsay, he definitely deserves a vote.
Yes.
Because he's been great for the last 5 weeks, I reckon.
From what we've seen out of the game so far, he's had some very solid performances. Being very, very young. Again, this is entirely a young team as it is. It is a little bit hard to stand out, kind of in the grand scheme of things, but you could very much see that even with the lack of defense in some areas, he has been able to put on some solid performances, and this one is so far probably his best. So he finished the game with 19 touches, 18 of them efficient, equating to 94.7% efficiency, 375 meters gained, 6 marks, 3 inside 50s, 2 score involvements, 3 tackles, 2 1%ers, and 2 spoils. And just all around the ground, he was very much, supporting his fellow defenders, allowing them to be freed up to do their own thing. It very much he kept his opponents accountable. He was doing all the right things at all the right moments, and it definitely helped to get this win on the board for the Eagles.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, it was really hard because movement off the halfback line was actually pretty tough. I do also want to give a shout out to Harvey Thomas, because a lot of the time the ball goes on the ground on the wing, and it felt like he was there putting pressure on. Ended up the game with 10 tackles as well as 25 possessions. Probably the Giants' best player, to be honest. But as I said, so the ability to hit targets down the field on the wing by Lindsay, he is very pretty accurate, and it's what they need. As I said, sort of moving on from Liam Duggan as a bowl user. Yeah, coincidentally, has actually probably improved as Josh Lindsay is coming to the side. Probably that variation and lack of pressure has sort of lifted his game. So, their half-back line looks so much better than it did last year, where it was pretty much just a turnover factory, which just led to score the other way. And although there's still a few moments and elements of that, it just, the improvement is what means the Eagles have winning potential, and they've won 3 times more than they did. Oh, sorry, 3 times as much as they did last year. So, congratulations to
And there's
them, Walitj-Marawar.
and there's still very much
And
opportunities for them to win a couple more games later on in the season.
yeah. So we'll have a look at that when we look at next week, the last half of Doug Nicholls.
Yes, so we're gonna start on. We're just gonna jump on this straight away. We'll touch on the ladder next week in next week's episode, but I figure we may as well just jump straight in and go with our big Thursday night clash down in Tasmania, where the Hawks host Kuwarna.
Yeah, and this is going to be a very interesting one because it's like two very almost teams at the moment. Like Adelaide, I feel like they've been good, but they're very almost good. We're starting to get a few maybe doubts creeping up at Hawthorn. But the biggest thing, obviously, with this game is the fact that it is, in fact, at UTAS. And as we all know, Hawthorn, maybe they've had some ups and downs, but a UTAS game normally can get them back onto the park. It'll just be very interesting, especially for what they do with the forwards, because it's really handy to have good tall forwards in that sort of games. When you have the win advantage, sometimes it's really good to have a player that you can just anchor kick to, for those long dumping kicks.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting if they, keep that Tobin Murray as he's been playing well, and even McAndrew as he's gone forward, or if they'll bring back some of the bigger names. It might be, it might be one of those ones where they'll give Thilthorpe another week of rest, but, as I said, it's just, I would say, it's hard because while I do think that Adelaide have probably a good enough defence to cause Hawthorn some headaches, when you consider Tasmania, you consider it's going to be a bit windy. I just think that Hawthorn will have enough avenues to score for it to not matter, and I think you'd just tip them. Whereas Adelaide, as I said, they've had some movement problems. Again, it becomes a bit easier to move the ball, win those windy games, but I just think with the experience, Hawthorn will get the job done here.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's much more of a safer bet for the Hawks here. One is purely for the fact that they have the experience down in Tasmania. They've got so much more experience than most of the teams. I believe North Melbourne would be the only other one in this indication. It's probably likely very similar conditions as you would expect at the Adelaide Oval. So they could play into Kuwarna's favour. However, I just think Hawks are known to really have bounce back performances whenever they play down here after a loss. So I expect them to just go back on the winners list on this one. In terms of just pure matchup, taking away the ground factor, I think the Hawks have a slightly better matchup in terms of their forward defense, their forward craft and their back craft. It's the midfield that's going to be the bigger question mark, as we've already talked about. A lot of that is just going through Newcomb or Weddle whenever he comes off of halfback. The Wizard, if he's playing in the midfield, or the other
Ginnivan.
smaller one, Ginnivan, thank you. Whether those two have an impact traveling through there, pushing up forward. That could be remain to be seen. They might end up throwing a tagger on one of them if they're having too much of an impact over someone like Newcomb. Is D'Ambrosio going to have another solid game, or is he going to get shut down by a player like Peatling? Alex Neil-Bullen, who has had some very solid performances over the past couple of weeks. Is he going to be shut down by Hawks defenders? Is all of the Adelaide Tools going to come back for this one, or because of the conditions, are they only going to maybe still play one, maybe two? There's a lot of big question marks, I think, for this kind of game.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably just a safer bet to just go with Hawthorn.
And I think even on team structure, as I said, these games tend to favour bulk supply, and Hawthorn throughout the season has been able to supply in bulk inside 50 a lot more than Adelaide, who have really struggled off halfback, even though both teams tend to defend well off halfback movement.
Yes,
so theoretically it should be a bit of a nil or draw, but again, considering the win, I just think the advantage is a bit more to teams that can generate rather than can defend it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. All right, now over to our Friday night clashes. One of them being our traditional Dreamtime show
Spoonball at the
match,
G.
but this is also a spoon bowl with Essendon being 17th and Richmond being 18th. I will be at this game. I am also working afterwards, so it'll be. I will be very much struggling during that shift, but otherwise, we do the best we can. In terms of this game itself, I have no expectations. If it's going to be as bad of a Dreamtime match as it was last year and the year before, I'm not expecting anything to come out of this. I would just want to hope that we can actually feel the team and play some sort of consistency. There were definitely bright moments in the game against St Kilda, but whether we're going to be able to carry that on to this game and maybe sneak in a second win, who knows? That remains to be seen. Essendon obviously asking the same sort of thing. I believe they're also only on one win, so they'll be looking for something similar.
2 wins.
Oh, sorry, they're on 2 wins, so they'll be looking for their third. Thank you.
Are they?
I don't know.
Sorry, 1 win. Sorry,
they are on 1 win. Okay, I thought
Melbourne.
so. Yeah.
They've beaten Melbourne.
Out of all teams for them to beat. But yeah, it's... So they're also looking for something very, very similar. This is going to be a real slog of a game. But I'm just going to go there to support my boys, and I just hope that we can see some sort of consistent performances from both teams.
Yeah, because I think the thing here is, theoretically, Essendon is, okay, we've got a decent attack, but our defense is absolutely dismal. And Richmond's like, okay, we've got a decent defense, but our attack's absolutely abysmal. As I said, Richmond have shown signs of getting their attack in order. I actually think, to what they've been putting out on the park and all that, it has been a bit underrated, how decent their attack has improved, where we've normally just seen them get, dismal scores. And, last year where they got 6-10, where that was, a terrible contest, 6-10 to 4-13 to Richmond's favour. I do think, just however, it's way too many injuries. You just can't be tipping Richmond at this point. But for one match, they can do it. Matchup-wise, statistic-wise, there's, not that much between these two teams. And, I think it only takes a good midfield performance to Richmond to get an edge over Essendon. It's just, as I said, it's asking a lot. And it's going to require a fair few fringe players to step up. But, not out of the realms, but not something I'm going to tip.
No, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility. But it's so unreliable to judge purely for the fact that our injury list is basically an entire team. So it's really hard to kind of determine whether it's worth a tip. Yeah, if you want to be safe, not that there's really a safe tip in this game, you'd probably go the Bombers. Depending on who the ins and outs kind of are for this game is whether I tip Richmond, I don't know. Because honestly, the reality of it is, if we didn't have the injury list that we did, I'd tip us in a heartbeat. No doubt about it. But because this is the situation that it is very hard to determine in this game specifically, where you go. In terms of a game that you can probably pretty safely know where to go, that is the second Friday night game with Walyalap hosting Euro-Yroke over at Optus.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I'll say about that is I think Fremantle are lucky that they're donning Walyalap this game, because they have some freaky matches with St Kilda. You've got to remember that in the last 10 matches where Fremantle have been consistently pretty good and where St Kilda's been mostly pretty crap, they have not won back-to-back games against St Kilda in this last 10 matches. They've gone 5-5. And yeah, as I said, they've just been... Yeah, they've had some upsets. Last year, that 33-94 performance where St Kilda probably looked a bit worse and Fremantle looked a bit okay, maybe they didn't look as good as they did at this point, but still, they had the advantage. And they just dropping this match. And it's weird, and it's not based off stats, because, if you if you base it off that, I mean, like Walyalap should have the clear advantage. They're much better off back half. They can defend off the back half, which is, sort of the one thing that St Kilda's sort of pretty good at, going from D50 to forward 50. So, they shouldn't have too many problems there. Obviously, the big forwards are going to be another point of contention for St Kilda. Wilkie, he's been really good, but he hasn't had that much tall support around him. But yeah, as I said, it's not, for two teams that, have a bit of, like, it's only defense that really separates these two teams. And, like, St Kilda's defense isn't bad by any means. It's just like Dockers is pretty much through the roof at this point. Again, a few moments of lapses, but overall, in a high-scoring league this year, they've been pretty good and pretty consistent. So, you back them in, but, like, scary things happen when St Kilda play Freo. The more you expect Freo to win, the more you sometimes get the opposite happening. But I'm not going to learn my lesson. I'm still going to tip Freo.
Yeah, I'm still leaning Freo on that one. Again, it's so hard to put any sort of confidence in St Kilda. That's just the nature of how they are.
I'd be surprised if it was over 30 points.
Yeah, I expect it to be a lot closer of a margin. But I'd still back Walyalap to get that win. Transitioning over now to our Saturday games, where we start at Marvel Stadium with North Melbourne hosting the Gold Coast Suns.
Yeah, this is really interesting because it's sort of like, okay, you've taken you've gotten, back on your home ground, and it's really hard with Gold Coast. It's like, yeah, they were good in the Northern Territory, but theoretically, it was only really for like, what, 3 quarters out of 8, I would say, that they really were, the game was fully in their control, and the rest was like either even or the start of St Kilda, where St Kilda were on top. So, it's questionable, I would say. I mean, obviously Gold Coast, they should have an advantage when it comes to, against the Roos defense, which is pretty abysmal. But we know that the Roos are a points from stoppage team. Like, that's where they get most of their score. And Gold Coast this year just haven't defended well. Like, their defense has been pretty bad when teams have been able to get the stoppage advantage. So it will be up to Raul, it will be up to Petrarca, it will be up to Noah Anderson to have a complete performance. And I'm not sure. I don't know. I got the feeling there might be an upset brewing. Like, I don't normally back North End, and maybe I'm a bit too harsh on Gold Coast, but I don't know. I just got the feeling that it might be. But, on paper, there's like, if Gold Coast get a bit too much movement going, they'll be able to, they should be able to win this. But I don't know. Maybe this is just like me getting a few upset wins last week, and I want to sort of recreate that glory. But as I said, I think Gold Coast tend to rely on a bit of an inside 50 advantage, but the Roos tend to produce forward 50s. And as I said, both teams are sort of, let's say, free-flowing when it comes to defending movements. So technically, both teams should get looks. So, as I said, fairly even game. I will probably still go Gold Coast, but, like, I don't think there's much in it. And it should be an exciting game.
I think this one will be a very exciting game. It's one for North
to prove themselves as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think North are, again, we've kind of talked about this already, but North are in a very solid rebuilding position right now. Like, we can see the kind of direction that they're going. But as we've also talked about throughout the season, their defense is still the worst part of their system. It is going to be a really tough midfield battle, I think, and that's where I think most of the contest is going to be, and where the ball will be won. Because we know how lethal the Suns forward line can be when it's on.
Yeah.
Especially as we've seen. And even in terms of like the ruck battle, like, Jared Witts, he might, be in a position where he needs that rest. But Ned Moyle stepping up has been huge. Coming up against Sherry this week.
Just doesn't have that, like Will Dawson wasn't really a factor in the game against Adelaide. So it is just Cherry coming back against the world, really. So
Yeah.
that'll be interesting to see too.
But with the transition of Luke Parker playing off of half back, that has given North a little bit more consistency in their defense. And it has
Yeah,
opened up their forward line to be a little bit more free flowing because you're able to allow that does free up, Curtis and Zerha and Larky and all the other players down there. I'm blanking on names, but
yeah,
you know how it
Trembath.
is. Trembath being the biggest one. I keep forgetting about Trembath for some reason. But
He's dropped off a couple of weeks, but he still should be a factor. I think this is a game for him to bounce back on.
I agree. I think this is going to be if North are able to win it down to the middle, I think their forward line will be extremely lethal and dangerous up against the Suns' defense, and that very much opens up a ton of avenues for them to win.
Yeah.
In terms of a tip, honestly, this could be the upset tip. So if you want to go for North, on it, go for North. But if you want to go the safe bet, the Suns are definitely the safer option.
Yeah, exactly. Because as I said, like the other downside for North is they don't always translate a good contested win into score.
Mm.
But as I said, clearance wise, like Gold Coast haven't been good this year. Like people think they're good, like they say the names, but like literally on paper, on the stats, they've been very patchy. They've had wins. They're very good at turning their clearance wins into score. But in terms of clearances themselves, they're being pretty consistently beat. So yeah, that'll be a very interesting contest, and part of the reason why we're surprisingly putting a bit of faith into North Melbourne, which is what I normally don't do. So
Yeah,
I feel like I'll give him a bit of credit.
I
I
think
just think matchup wise, it's a good chance.
I think North also deserve that bit of credit. Like I think they've done a lot of really solid
Yeah.
work this season, even if they don't have all of the wins on the board to kind of prove, uh, you know, prove that they're deserving of it. Let's just say.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Now for another close match,
A
probably at Goomba.
this is the big top four clash. Actually, this is like
Yeah.
one of our first
On paper match of
actually.
the round.
Yeah, 100%. Geelong hosting the Sydney Swans down in Geelong, and honestly, like I know Geelong are heavily favoured here, and they have a right to be so. It is being played in
Are
Geelong.
they?
But I think Sydney match up really really well against this team. I think that Sydney's midfield is honestly better than Geelong's at this point in
Oh,
time.
yeah.
Um, I know that's a lot to say, especially to Geelong supporters, they'll say otherwise. But like
It's
Sydney
it
what
depends how
Sydney have
you
been
view it.
doing, yeah, true. But what Sydney have been
Technically,
doing
head to
this
head,
season,
Sydney get more clearances. But Geelong get more points from stoppage. But again, 10 games into the season, and we're talking like a very marginal difference.
yeah, and the fact that but these two teams play very differently as well. Sydney have a much more explosive style of gameplay coming out of the middle, whereas Geelong are very methodical. They've always loved to play from stoppage. That's just how they've always been. And
Yeah, well, they get impact from stoppage. Like, I know what you mean. Like, technically, when we're talking about like impact from the middle, it's like consistent impact. That's where Sydney, like, they will win. They'll get good clearances and they'll grind you down.
yeah,
Whereas I feel like Geelong get that burst. Like they have a few good centre bounce clearances, and that'll help the other bit of their game, which is obviously outside run.
yeah,
Um,
exactly right. And like
yes,
it's a special, and that's where players like Ryan Myers and Bailey Smith come in because you win that tap, pass it to them off of a stoppage, like whether it's usually if it's on a wing, especially, they get so much extra space to run from. Whereas if you go from a tap in the middle, from Grundy to Heaney, that's more of your middle explosive impact. And that's where those teams got to differ because Geelong really love to play along that wing a lot more in their stoppages if they're able to, because it gives them so much more space in their run. Um,
yeah.
in terms of like the defensive, like the back 50 to forward 50 kind of matchups, I think it's fairly even across the board. To be honest, I think a lot of this
Well,
match will
yeah.
come mostly down to that midfield.
Technically, the biggest advantage you'll give to Sydney is that they are defensively good at preventing transition, which, as said, even though Geelong's transition is fantastic, theoretically, like in terms of the matchup, Sydney's is a bit better. But I think that's also sort of, I think that's a bit due to some of the more emphatic wins that Sydney have gotten this year against some of the things. Because when they've dominated, they've completely destroyed some teams. Been able to do it against good sides, but like that isn't as exaggerated. So I think in this matchup where it's a bit more even, I do think like Sydney, like I think this is a very even matchup that, as I said, Geelong being at Goomba is just like a little bit, but I wouldn't be afraid to tip Sydney here. It's a bit against recent history. It's a bit against, conventional wisdom of Geelong at Goomba, but like theoretically on matchup, Sydney should win, but like again, I think Geelong are just quality enough where you're probably just going to tip them anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
Like
kind of
everything
agree.
else is like marginal in terms of like minor stats.
I definitely think, like the North Suns game, I think Geelong are very much a safer option. Um,
Hmm.
but if you want another cheeky upset, like I don't see anything wrong with
Yeah.
tipping the Swans here. Like again, they're number one.
Well, it's not like an upset where like it's like a matchup advantage or whatever.
No,
But I
it's
think
it's
more
just like,
in this game, it's just pure quality. And
yeah,
like
pretty much.
again, it's gonna be very interesting to see how Blitzarves versus Grundy goes, because we know Blitzarves can just have like an okay game, but like do a lot of his damage by limiting the opponent's ruck impact and then just running the game out on the wings. Like just being okay, we're gonna make ruck nil all contest. We're gonna get a few moments of clearances, and then we're just gonna win the game on the outside. That's a tactic that Geelong could employ. And that would be interesting, but I don't know if he can do that against Heaney. He just looks so good this year, so that'll be an interesting one. Keep an eye on it. But like, keep
Agreed.
an eye on the game anyway. It should be a cracker.
Oh yeah, 100%. If you definitely have an option to be able to watch the game because I think this will be one of the best ones to watch for this round. All right, jumping over now to the MCG, where Collingwood host Walitj-Marawar for Scott Pendlebury's record-breaking game. Do you think the Eagles can pull off the funniest thing ever?
I wish. I so wish. Look, it's interesting because obviously the Eagles have been um bad. Like even with last week, like they weren't clean and they weren't overly potent. They were just better than GWS. And as much as we say about Collingwood, as much as we find it funny, and they've had some problems, there are points from turnover team against one of the more poorer users of the ball.
Mm.
So theoretically, Collingwood just have like avenues to score. They'll like cream rise to the top. They should just trounce West Coast. Really, the biggest thing is the midfield. I think where Collingwood have been legitimately poor. West Coast can find a few options. I think defense. I think Collingwood won't find it. I think Collingwood will find it easy to score outside of their normal targets. But I do think West Coast can defend technically. It'll just be as I said, those easy marking options coming from a turnover. Obviously Scott Pendlebury's game. As I said, it'll be the biggest things where people will put an eyes on this. But as I said, it's really hard to imagine that this is gonna be a contest that anyone watches compared to the other one, except for like Collingwood and Eagles fans.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just as I said, Collingwood. You might argue that they struggle for territory occasionally and all that sort of thing, but again, the Eagles just give you enough to where you think that they have enough maturity and veteranship to come away with the win, and a fairly easy one at that, I would imagine.
Yeah, you would assume that Collingwood should just straight up win this outright, disregarding the fact that it's meant to be a quote unquote monumental game. Like you'd expect, just purely on paper, Collingwood should win this out.
I think that the Eagles have more chance just to be like jerks and cause an upset. Like I actually think that the Pendlebury game takes away from Collingwood more than it gains.
Yeah, I agree.
It's just like a pure vibe.
I would genuinely love the Eagles to just come out and absolutely embarrass them. I would love that absolutely. So much. But that remains to be seen as to whether that's actually going to happen. But so we'll just transition over to our next game, another big Saturday night game at the Adelaide Oval where Yaartapulti will host Carlton.
The best 3-7 team of all time versus the best 2-8 team of all time. Look, I'm not saying to end this on unless you're a fan of both teams, but it's interesting, it's like both teams technically should have points where they're clearly better than what they're doing. Like Port, as much as I think there's some good sides of them, like they are pretty arse in the contest. They lose pretty consistently in the contested possession, which is where Carlton tend to accelerate. At the same time, Port Adelaide, their movement from the D half to forward 50 tend to be quite good, and they defend really well from the outside, which is where Carlton sort of struggle. So, like, both have points where they can sort of have a leg up on the opposition. What I will say is that I do legitimately think, from what I've seen, like Port are probably a bit ahead of Carlton in terms of like their performance of their best players. As long as they can keep their structures clean. Also, Port they tend to perform a bit better when oppositions are turning the ball over, at least offensively. I think the opposite's true. When they aren't getting intercepts, they do struggle to score. So I think just purely for the fact that Carlton should open up a few avenues for Port to score, and I think they might struggle a bit, I'm going for Port Adelaide. And that's like a legitimate me trying to think of it and not just be like, okay, I'm a Port supporter, I just tip Port Adelaide anyway.
Yeah.
I do legitimately think they have a slight advantage over Carlton here. But it's not going to be much, and there's a chance that Josh Fraser just goes back to back. Like, theoretically, there's not that much difference between these two teams, and, their win record closeness is probably reflected of that.
Honestly,
even though I think both teams probably could have a few more wins to this point.
Honestly, I agree with you in the fact that like there's absolutely an avenue here where Port just win this outright. Like again, Carlton just being Carlton, they're in a very very weird position right now. It kind of there's a little bit more unpredictability on them right now as well. So they could very much just come out and win back to back games. But just purely based on on paper, what we know from these teams, you'd expect Port Adelaide to kind of have a much better performance this week. Especially against a team that is technically lesser than them.
Yeah, I think unlike Carlton, where like all their lines tend to fluctuate, like Port's defense has legitimately been good this season. And like it's been through most of the matches. Like again, maybe starting when they had a few back half turnovers, like they were a bit poor and they're sort of struggling, but like a lot of the games this year has normally been either poor conversion or the opposition just kicking the lights out, which has unfortunately happened a few times against them. And again, I don't always think that, part of like some of that's a bit of created luck, but I think against Carlton they should just even out. Like their defensive dominance should be able to beat out Carlton as long as they're generate a few turnovers.
Yeah, of course. Like there are very much like avenues of them to win, but you got to make sure that Carlton just don't suddenly kind of show up and prevent those very minor avenues of score. Under power. All right, let's just transition over now to the Sunday games. You expected this first one to kind of be a simple win for the reigning premiers, but it is the Giants hosting the Lions at NG Stadium.
Yeah, I think the only thing I will say about this is that the Lions actually haven't had a really good record at NG. Really, their only wins has been one in their like 3-year stretch of dominance, but the rest have been when they were sort of struggling. So there is minor reasons to think that GWS could cause an upset. Fighting back from a pretty dismal performance, but when you look at the list, you look at how many players that GWS have out and how not strong Brisbane have been, but like they've been getting back into it despite the loss last week. I would say it's pretty much expected that Brisbane are going to run away with it. Again, especially when you talk about the stoppage differential for both teams. Like, Brisbane should just chew and spit out the inside midfield of GWS. But, as I said, it's a game that's been close in recent history. And, there's some, possibility history-wise that might be good. But, as I said, Brisbane matching up-wise, forward half-wise, you think they'll just stomp away with the victory here.
Yeah, you'd think so. Again, even and it's not even just on that. Like, on paper itself, the Lions should win it just purely outright. Just going off of the fact that the Giants still have a fair amount of injuries that they're still dealing with, that are in key areas that Brisbane can very easily capitalize on. Brisbane will likely get Zorko back in as well. That helps so much more with their transition off of half back. And provided their midfield can, not kind of, fall out of form all of a sudden, as it as it somewhat did last week. They should be fine. They should be fine. But again,
it just seems like with how disciplined the Brisbane teams are, they don't often come back stinking 2 weeks in a row.
No, normally they bounce back pretty quickly. But yet, with it being at NG Stadium, there's a weird animosity at this ground for the Lions. So who knows what could happen?
The only avenue really I can see.
All right, jumping over now to our last game of the round at Marvel Stadium, where the Western Bulldogs will host Naarm. Tim English should be back this week, I believe. So that'll make a huge factor. That'll be a big difference in terms of the Bulldogs' midfield structure right off the bat. But with Melbourne's consistent performances over the past few weeks, I could very much see them winning comfortably in this one.
I think that's on paper they theoretically should, because they both play a similar style to each other. Obviously, Melbourne has had more offensive tools to work with. They haven't had as many options stripped away. But as I said, both are a very positive clearance team. Both are very working in the forward half, and both are fairly loose. So what I will say is that Bulldogs should be looking for a few more avenues to outside movement, because Melbourne will give you that. And they should be hunting for intercepts, because Melbourne will allow you to get a few more points from turnovers, where, as I said, Bulldogs still have a healthy amount, but probably not quite as much as Melbourne have been able to generate. So realistically, as I said, okay, we had a down week in the stoppage. We can match them. We can get a few points from turnover. But I just think that, with the amount missing and how rounded Melbourne have been, is Bulldogs are probably going to score a bit more. But I still think Melbourne outscore them. I legitimately think that Melbourne, even if this was even, Bulldogs had a few more players back, I still think there's an edge for Melbourne to outscore them anyway. And with the players missing, I think that's a bit more exaggerated. As I said, I'm just going to tip Melbourne comfortably, but I don't think this will be as disappointing as the last match was.
No, I think this will be a much better performance out of the Dogs comparatively. Again, across the ground, they match up fairly well. It might depend on if Bulldogs get more back other than just Tim English. Whether they get a little bit more support back in defense, or whether they get a little bit more lethality up forward. I don't entirely know what Bevo was thinking in terms of making changes. I don't know. I don't think he'll change too much, just because I think who they already have out in the ground is probably the best they're going to get, unless they get more people back from injury.
I'd say James O'Donnell is the most likely one.
O'Donnell would be the other big one, because he's the other, when both him and Lob went out, it was kind of big alarms. But now the Lob's back in, they're only kind of just missing O'Donnell.
You basically have your defensive structure back to where it was.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a defensive structure that had a bit better movement. It wasn't fantastic lights out defense, but it was definitely enough to carry the offense. So, as I said, and that's really the thing, is defensively, I think, they're fine. I think both teams will be honest to where they're at in terms of list structure. it's just like Melbourne have much more tools to generate offense than the Bulldogs currently do, which is
Yeah,
why I'm favouring them.
yeah, I completely agree. But yeah, no, in like there's very much big opportunities for Naarm here,
Yeah.
to get another comfortable win and continue to kind of defy the odds of being a potential top 4 team.
Yeah, I don't think it will happen. Honestly, I think there'll be a point in the season where Melbourne will probably get their ball use coming back to them. And it can happen in this game. Like, as I said, like Essendon were a team where, as I said, they found Melbourne attacking too hard, couldn't quite get it done, able to get the intercept. And, when you score off turnover, like any team can look threatening.
Mm.
Doesn't really matter who you're playing. But I do like the fact that Melbourne have just been going at it. So it's like, again, it's for the Bulldogs. It's like, yeah, you're underdogs. I don't think you're that far away, but the avenues of you winning are coming less and less likely. It's all about making sure it's accountable, and as I said, making sure it's like now you got the defensive structure back. Start your movement like it was at the start of the season. See if you can get the ball forward. Melbourne will allow that, and also if Melbourne are a bit off, outmuscle them because you still have the ability to do that. You still have your core. You still have a part of a great midfield. Yeah, also just depends on who's coming back, obviously, as well.
Yeah, it really does make a huge difference for this one, who the ins and outs are. But that does bring us to the end of the episode. Thank you all so much for liking, commenting, subscribing, and just coming to hang out with us this week. Are you up to much this week, or are you just having another chill week?
Sort of. So, for the volunteering I do, the tutoring, they've sort of got a little workshop, which I'll probably go to the first half for. I'll probably head back, so I can do a few things later in the evening, but nothing of huge note. I am just having a pretty subdued but good weekend. Also, my dad's birthday on Wednesday, so I'm gonna go out. I got a doctor's appointment in the morning. I've got him a
Yes.
few treats from Fremantle. Got him some dried figs, some what is it? Pistachio, nougat, and then I'm just gonna hopefully get some nice cheeses to go along with it. Because he has wide interest and a lot of money, which means that he just buys. Sorry, not wide interest, specific interest and his own money, which means he just buys his own stuff.
Yeah,
It's very hard to buy for him.
my
So
dad
just
does
like,
the exact same thing, and it's his birthday coming
we
up
just
too. So
yeah, it's treats. So yeah, so it might be a bit of a fun Wednesday. Also, my cat, has been going to the vet. We've been trying to sort out her heart rate. That's been going, and she'll be having a little teeth cleaned on Friday, which hopefully all goes well. Might be good. I mean that I've had a feeling that she's gone off her little hard biscuits, and I'm hoping that with her teeth clean, she might get back into biting things a bit more. Talking about my dad, she needs to bite my dad a bit more because my dad's a jerk to her. And I encourage her as much, scratch him, bite him, tell him no, but just too nice, precious little things. So
too
yeah,
kind.
hopefully she goes well after this.
Being
How
my
about you?
fingers are
You
crossed. I'm not
yeah.
up to too much this week. I hand the keys back to my old place this week, which is going to be a little bit of a sad moment. Otherwise,
Yeah,
I'm mostly just going to
always is.
be trying to get this place organized and tidied up because the mess is driving me insane already. It is a little bit better than what it was when we actually like first moved it all in. But there's still a lot to do before I'm like completely comfortable with it. I need to get used to like my new washing machine. I have a dryer now, so I need to get used to figuring out how that works. Um, I have a dishwasher, so I need to know how that works. Um, not
Ah,
this isn't my
do
first
you,
dishwasher I've ever owned.
yeah. Do you have a
But
kitchen?
yeah, I have like a proper kitchen, which is really nice.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's like
Please,
it's.
you can use the chopping boards I bought you.
I know. 50-50 on whether that'll actually happen. But no, like there's still a ton of work around here I need to get done. I'm hoping to do some after this recording. Um, I'm obviously going to Dreamtime on Friday night. So I am looking forward to that. It's always good to see the pre-game performances of the First Nations people and the involvement of the two clubs. I'm very much looking forward to that. And then yeah, it's just not too much else after that. Just, posting hopefully an easy week at work. That's what I'm mostly hoping for.
Yeah, I hope it is because, as I said, yeah, there's been a lot going along for you. So I hope this move is fairly relaxed. Hopefully you have a bit of time to enjoy, unwind, obviously at Dream Time, and yeah, as I said, hope it all finishes off smoothly for you.
I did forget to mention that I did also go to a gig last night as we're recording this for Enter
Oh
Shikari.
yeah, Enter Shikari.
Yes.
Yeah.
For really, really, really solid, solid set. I only knew like 4 of the songs because I only know the new album. But it was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
Grandson was their opener, and whilst I don't know many of their songs, they did not play any of the ones that I knew. They're insane performance from them. And then
nice.
the first supporting act, which I didn't get to see, is Friends of Friends. But I heard from the people that I spoke to around us, they said that they were really good. So go check any of them out if you want some new music recommendations. But yeah, that does bring us to the end of the episode. Thank you all so much, and we will see you all next week. Take care.